The broken glass hit the diner floor just as Marcus Hill realized his daughter was watching everything. Across the dimly lit restaurant, a man's hand gripped a woman's wrist so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The entire room had frozen, forks suspended mid-air, conversations died mid-sentence, every eye locked on the unfolding violence. But nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody was willing to get involved until Marcus pushed back his chair, the screech of metal against linoleum cutting through the terrible silence like a blade. He didn't know her name, didn't know if stepping forward would cost him everything he'd worked to build. He only knew that his 8-year-old daughter shouldn't have to learn that good people stay silent when someone needs help. If you're watching this story from your city tonight, drop a comment below and hit that like button. I want to see just how far Marcus's story travels, because what happens next will remind you that one moment of courage can change absolutely everything. The first thing people usually noticed about Marcus Hill wasn't his height, though at 6'2" he certainly stood out in most rooms. It wasn't his build either, even though years of hauling transmissions and wrestling with stubborn engine blocks had carved his frame into something solid and capable. What people noticed first, what they always noticed, was the quiet. Marcus carried silence the way other men carried swagger. Not the uncomfortable kind that made you want to fill the air with nervous chatter, but the steady, grounded kind that somehow made you feel safer just being near him. He spoke when words mattered, moved with deliberate purpose, and had mastered the rare art of being completely present without demanding attention. It was a Tuesday evening in late September when everything changed, though Marcus had no way of knowing that when he pulled his dented Ford pickup into the gravel parking lot of Rosie's diner. The sun hung low over the Georgia pines, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. His daughter Zoe bounced in the passenger seat, her braided pigtails swinging as she spotted the familiar neon sign. "Daddy, can I get the pancakes? The ones with the smiley face?" Marcus smiled, killing the engine. "Baby girl, it's 6 o'clock at night." "Pancakes don't know what time it is," Zoe replied with the unshakable logic of an 8-year-old. "They just know they're delicious." Can't argue with that reasoning. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt, his hand still stained with the engine grease that never quite washed out completely. Pancakes it is. Rosie's diner had been a fixture in Millbrook for as long as Marcus could remember. The building sagged slightly to one side like an old dog settling onto a favorite cushion, and the vinyl booths had been patched so many times they looked like a quilt pattern. But the coffee was strong, the portions were generous, and nobody looked twice at a mechanic still wearing his work clothes. Most importantly, they'd never once made Marcus feel like he needed to apologize for existing while black in a town that was 80% white. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. Rosie herself stood behind the counter, her steel gray hair pulled into its usual no-nonsense bun. She'd owned the place for 37 years and could still flip hash browns faster than men half her age. "Well, if it isn't my favorite customer and her dad," Rosie called out, her weathered face creasing into a genuine smile. "Let me guess, someone wants breakfast for dinner?" Zoe giggled, climbing onto a stool at the counter. "How'd you know?" "Because you, little miss, are a creature of habit." Rosie winked, already reaching for the pancake mix. "Your usual booth's open if you want it, Marcus." Marcus nodded his thanks, guiding Zoe toward the worn booth in the back corner. It offered a clear view of the entrance and the parking lot beyond. Old habits from childhood that he'd never quite shaken. His mother used to say he was born watching his back, though she'd said it with sadness rather than pride. The diner held maybe a dozen other customers scattered across the space. An elderly couple Marcus recognized from the hardware store. A trio of high school kids huddled over their phones in a center booth. A long-haul trucker nursing coffee and working through a crossword puzzle. And in the booth closest to the front window, a young woman sat alone, staring at an untouched plate of food. Marcus registered her presence the way he registered everyone. Basic situational awareness that came naturally after growing up in neighborhoods where paying attention could mean the difference between making it home and becoming a statistic. She was white, probably mid-20s, with honey blonde hair that caught the diner's fluorescent lights. Well-dressed in a way that didn't quite match Rosie's usual clientele. Silk blouse, expensive-looking jewelry, the kind of carefully maintained appearance that spoke of money and status. She seemed nervous, checking her phone repeatedly, glancing toward the door every few seconds. "Daddy, you're not listening." Zoe's voice pulled him back. "Sorry, baby. What were you saying? I said Mrs. Patterson gave us homework about what our parents do for work. I told her you're a mechanic, and she said that's a very important job. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the one that appeared whenever Zoe's innocence brushed up against the realities he was trying to shield her from. She didn't know yet that very important was often code for blue collar, or worse. Didn't understand that some people would hear mechanic and make assumptions about her father's intelligence, his ambition, his worth. Mrs. Patterson's right, he said carefully. Every honest job is important. You remember what I always tell you? The value of work isn't measured by the suit you wear. It's measured by the pride you take in doing it right. Zoe recited it perfectly, then grinned. Can we add that the value of pancakes is measured by how many chocolate chips they have? Now, you're just negotiating. Is it working? Before Marcus could answer, the bell above the door chimed again. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop several degrees despite the September warmth. The man who entered moved with the aggressive confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. Mid-30s, expensive suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month, dark hair slicked back with too much product. His face was flushed, from alcohol, from anger, or from both. The young woman in the front booth went rigid, her knuckles whitening around the phone in her hand. Victoria. The man's voice carried across the diner, sharp enough to cut glass. What the hell do you think you're doing? Every conversation in the restaurant stuttered and died. The elderly couple glanced up nervously. The teenagers suddenly found their phones fascinating. The trucker hunched lower over his crossword. Marcus felt Zoe press closer to his side. I'm having dinner, Blake. The woman, Victoria, kept her voice steady, but Marcus could hear the tremor underneath. Just like I said I would. Don't play games with me. Blake crossed the diner in 4 long strides, looming over her booth. You were supposed to meet me at the club an hour ago. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was to have everyone asking where you were? I told you I didn't want to go tonight. I wanted space. We talked about this. No, you talked. I didn't agree to anything. Blake's hand shot out, gripping Victoria's wrist. Now get up. We're leaving. Victoria tried to pull away. You're hurting me. I said get up. The sound of shattering glass exploded through the diner as Victoria knocked her water glass to the floor, jerking away from Blake's grip. The liquid spread across the linoleum in a glittering puddle, ice cubes scattering like dice. Marcus felt Zoe's small hand clutch his arm. Daddy. He looked down at his daughter's face, those wide, frightened eyes that trusted him to make sense of the world, to keep her safe, to show her what right looked like even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. The entire diner had turned into a tableau of frozen figures, everyone watching, nobody moving. Stay here, Marcus said quietly. Daddy, no. Stay here, Zoe. Don't move from this booth. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor with that same terrible screech that seemed to wake the room from its paralysis. Marcus moved with the same deliberate calm he brought to everything, crossing the diner with measured steps that ate up the distance without rushing. His work boots crunched over broken glass. Blake had Victoria's wrist again, yanking her to her feet. She stumbled, catching herself against the booth's edge. Excuse me. Marcus's voice was quiet, but it carried. I think the lady asked you to stop. Blake's head snapped around, his eyes narrowing as he took in Marcus. The grease-stained work clothes, the dark skin, the interference he clearly hadn't anticipated. This is a private conversation. Mind your business. Hard to be private when you're making a scene in a public place. Marcus kept his hands visible, his posture non-threatening but unmovable. She asked you to let go, so let go. Who the hell do you think you are? Blake's face flushed darker. Do you have any idea who I am? Who her family is? Don't care, Marcus said simply. All I know is she wants you to leave her alone and you're not listening. Victoria had gone completely still, her eyes wide. Marcus could see the calculations running behind them. Surprise, fear, hope, uncertainty all flickering past too quickly to catalog. Blake released Victoria's wrist with a theatrical gesture, spreading his hands wide. Fine. Whatever. You want a white knight for some random woman in a dive diner? Be my guest. He turned back to Victoria, his voice dropping to something that was somehow more threatening for its quietness. But you and I both know how this ends, Vic. You think running to some truck stop changes anything? You think he's going to protect you? I think you should leave, Marcus said. He hadn't moved closer, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't done anything that could be construed as aggressive. But something in his absolute stillness, in the complete absence of fear or uncertainty, seemed to finally penetrate Blake's alcohol-fueled bravado. This isn't over, Blake said, pointing at Victoria. Then his gaze swung to Marcus, and for just a moment, something ugly and ancient flickered in his eyes. And you should really think about the consequences of getting involved in things that don't concern you. Blake turned and walked out, slamming the diner door hard enough to make the bell clatter. Through the window, Marcus watched him climb into a silver BMW that probably cost more than Marcus's house. The engine roared to life with excessive force, gravel spraying as Blake peeled out of the parking lot. The silence that followed felt like the aftermath of a thunderstorm, that strange, suspended moment where everyone's still waiting to see if it's really over. Marcus turned to Victoria. She'd sunk back into the booth, her hands trembling as she pressed them against the table. Mascara had started to streak down her cheeks, though she seemed unaware of the tears. "You okay?" Marcus asked. Victoria looked up at him, and he saw the exact moment the adrenaline crashed and the reality hit. I don't... I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to... Thank you. God, thank you. Don't need to thank me. Marcus glanced back toward his booth, where Zoe was watching with huge eyes. Rosie had appeared beside her, one protective hand on the girl's shoulder. You want me to call someone? Police? Friend? Victoria shook her head rapidly. No police. It would make everything worse. He's connected. His family and mine. She trailed off, seeming to realize she was over-explaining to a stranger. I just need a minute. I'll be fine. Marcus didn't believe her. She was clearly not fine. But he also recognized the look of someone who'd had enough of being the center of attention. Okay, well, I'll be right over there if you need anything. He started to turn away. Wait, Victoria called out. What's your name? Marcus Hill. Thank you, Marcus Hill. I mean it. Most people would have just... She gestured vaguely at the room, at all the people who'd watched and done nothing. Most people are scared, Marcus said quietly. Can't blame them for that. World teaches us real early that getting involved comes with costs. He returned to his booth where Zoe immediately grabbed his hand. Is that lady okay, Daddy? I think she will be, baby. Marcus slid back into his seat, his heart still hammering even though his hands remained steady. Sometimes people need help, and we help them. That's all. Even when it's scary? Especially when it's scary. Rosie arrived with Zoe's pancakes, extra chocolate chips, Marcus noticed, and his usual black coffee. She set them down without a word, but her eyes held a mixture of approval and worry that said more than any speech. Marcus tried to return his attention to dinner, to his daughter's animated description of the treehouse she wanted him to build in their backyard. But his awareness kept drifting to the front booth, where Victoria sat alone, still trembling, still crying quietly into a napkin. About 20 minutes later, the diner had resumed its normal rhythm. The elderly couple had left. The teenagers were arguing about some video game. The trucker had abandoned his crossword in favor of a piece of Rosie's famous apple pie. Victoria stood up, gathering her purse with hands that had finally steadied. She walked toward the exit, then paused beside Marcus's booth. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, her voice stronger now, though her eyes were still red. I just wanted to say thank you again, and to tell your daughter that she's lucky to have such a brave father. Zoe beamed up at her. I know! He's the best daddy in the whole world. Something in Victoria's expression cracked, pain and longing, and something that looked almost like envy. I can see that. You two have a good night. She was halfway to the door when Marcus called out, You sure you're okay to drive? I could call you a cab if... I'm okay, Victoria said, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I promise. Thank you, though, for everything. Marcus watched her leave, watched her expensive car pull out of the parking lot with much more care than Blake had shown. Then he turned his attention back to Zoe, who was using the last piece of pancake to soak up chocolate chip-infused syrup. Daddy, Zoe said around a mouthful of food. Don't talk with your mouth full, baby. She swallowed dramatically. Why didn't anybody else help that lady? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering how to explain human nature to an 8-year-old. Sometimes, he finally said, people see something wrong happening and they think someone else will step in, or they're scared of making it worse. Or they tell themselves it's not their problem. It's not that they're bad people. They're just frozen. But you weren't frozen. No, I wasn't. Why not? Marcus looked at his daughter, this beautiful, bright, questioning soul who deserved better answers than the world usually provided. Because, baby girl, I want you to grow up knowing that we don't look away when someone needs help. We don't calculate the costs before we do what's right. We just do it, and we deal with whatever comes after. Even if it's dangerous? Even then. But I'm always careful, Zoe. I promise, I'm always careful. She seemed satisfied with that answer, returning her attention to the serious business of scraping every last bit of syrup from her plate. Marcus sipped his coffee, letting the familiar bitter warmth ground him. Rosie appeared again, this time with the check. Coffee's on the house tonight, she said quietly. What you did, that took guts, Marcus. Not many men would have stepped up like that. Wasn't trying to be a hero, just couldn't sit there and watch. I know, that's what makes it matter. Rosie glanced toward the window, toward the darkness beyond. That boy, Blake, he's trouble. Comes from money, thinks the rules don't apply to him. You watch yourself here. Men like that don't forget. I'll be careful. Make sure you are. Your girl needs her daddy. After Rosie left, Marcus paid the check and gathered Zoe's jacket. They walked out to the truck together, Zoe chattering about the treehouse design she'd been working on in her notebook. Marcus listened with half an ear, the other half attuned to the parking lot, to the shadows between the streetlights, to the potential for consequences that Rosie had warned about. But the night was quiet. Just crickets and the distant sound of traffic from the highway. The drive home took 15 minutes through darkened country roads lined with pine trees. Their house sat at the end of a gravel driveway, a small ranch-style structure that Marcus had bought for almost nothing and spent 3 years making livable. The roof didn't leak anymore. The plumbing worked. The electrical system no longer threatened to burn the place down. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Zoe was asleep before they reached the driveway, her head lolling against the seatbelt. Marcus carried her inside, navigating the familiar path to her bedroom, even in the dark. He tucked her into bed, still wearing her clothes, knowing she'd wake up confused but too tired to disturb her now. For a long moment, Marcus stood in the doorway watching his daughter sleep. She looked so peaceful, so utterly safe in this small room, with its glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling and stuffed animals crowding the bed. She had no idea how close they constantly were to losing everything, how 3 months of work had saved up just enough to cover another 3 months of mortgage if his already struggling garage finally went under, how the truck in the driveway needed transmission work he couldn't afford, how he sometimes ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so she could have actual meals. She didn't know, and if Marcus had his way, she never would. She'd grow up believing in a world where hard work mattered, where integrity counted, where doing the right thing was its own reward. Even if Marcus knew better, even if every day reminded him that the deck was stacked, the game was rigged, and men who looked like him started 10 steps behind. But tonight, he'd done something that mattered. Tonight, he'd shown Zoe what it looked like to stand up when standing up was hard. And maybe, just maybe, he'd helped someone who needed it. That had to count for something. Marcus changed out of his work clothes and into sweatpants and an old t-shirt. He made himself a sandwich he didn't want and ate it standing at the kitchen counter. Then he settled onto the worn couch with his laptop, pulling up the accounting software for Hill's Auto Repair. The numbers hadn't improved since he'd checked them this morning. He had 3 cars in the shop, a brake job on a Honda, an oil change on a Ford, and a diagnostic on a Chevy that the owner probably couldn't afford to fix once Marcus figured out what was wrong with it. Maybe $400 total revenue if he was lucky. Against monthly expenses that ran closer to $3,000 when you counted the shop rent, utilities, insurance, supplies, and the salary for Danny, his part-time helper. Marcus ran the same calculations he ran every night, trying to find some combination of numbers that added up to stability. But math was relentless. It didn't care about effort or integrity or how badly you wanted to build something that lasted. He was so absorbed in the spreadsheet that he almost missed the sound of a car pulling into his driveway. Almost, but not quite. Marcus's head snapped up, his body tensing with instincts that never quite slept. Through the front window, he could see headlights, expensive LED lights, attached to a vehicle that definitely didn't belong in this neighborhood at midnight on a Tuesday. Marcus stood, moving toward the window with the same deliberate calm that had served him in the diner. A black Mercedes sedan idled in his driveway, engine purring like a contented cat. The driver's side door opened, and a man in an actual chauffeur's uniform stepped out. He was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and the kind of military bearing that suggested years of discipline. The chauffeur walked up to Marcus's front door and knocked, 3 precise taps. Marcus opened the door but kept the screen closed between them. "Help you? Mr. Marcus Hill?" The chauffeur's voice was formal, but not unfriendly. "That's me. My name is Bernard. I work for the Langford family. Miss Victoria asked me to deliver something to you." He held out a cream-colored envelope, the kind of expensive stationery that Marcus had only seen in movies. Marcus stared at the envelope for a long moment before opening the screen door and accepting it. "What is this?" "I'm not privy to the contents, sir. Miss Victoria simply asked that I ensure it reached you personally." Bernard stepped back, nodding once. "Have a good evening." Marcus watched the Mercedes reverse out of his driveway and disappear down the road before closing the door. He turned the envelope over in his hands, heavy paper stock, his name written in elegant script across the front. Inside was a single folded note on matching stationery. The handwriting was feminine, slightly rushed, as though written quickly in the aftermath of strong emotion. "Dear Marcus, I don't have adequate words to thank you for what you did tonight. You didn't know me. You had every reason to mind your own business and protect yourself and your daughter from potential trouble, but you stood up anyway. I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who claim to care about me while simultaneously controlling every aspect of my existence. People who say they love me, but use that love as a weapon. People who have resources and power and influence, but who wouldn't dream of actually putting themselves at risk for anyone else. And then there was you, a stranger in a diner who simply did the right thing because it was right. I know you'll probably want to refuse what I'm about to tell you, so I've already made it impossible. This isn't charity. It's not pity. It's an investment in the kind of person the world needs more of. Please check your business account. I hope this helps, even a little. With profound gratitude, Victoria Langford." Marcus's hands started shaking before he finished reading. He grabbed his laptop, fumbling with the password for his business banking portal. The page loaded with maddening slowness. And there it was. A deposit dated today. $50,000. The number didn't compute at first. Marcus stared at it, certain he was misreading, that there was a decimal point he'd missed, that this was some kind of mistake or joke or fever dream. $50,000. More money than he'd made in the past 2 years combined. More money than he'd ever seen in one place. Enough to save the garage, to fix the truck, to build Zoe that treehouse, to breathe without the constant strangling weight of barely keeping his head above water. Marcus sat down hard on the couch, the laptop balanced on his knees, the note still clutched in his hand. Part of him wanted to laugh. Part of him wanted to cry. Part of him wanted to call whoever Victoria Langford was and explain that he couldn't possibly accept this, that helping someone shouldn't come with a price tag, that he'd done what any decent person would do. But another part, the part that woke up every morning wondering if today would be the day everything fell apart, that part whispered that maybe the universe had finally sent him a break, that maybe doing the right thing could actually work out for once. Marcus looked toward Zoe's bedroom, thinking about his daughter sleeping peacefully, unaware that their lives had just shifted on their axis. Thinking about all the times he'd chosen to pay the mortgage instead of buying her the shoes she needed, all the times he'd smiled and pretended everything was fine while the weight of poverty crushed him from every direction. He thought about Victoria's note. This isn't charity, it's an investment. And he thought about how his mother used to say that pride was a luxury poor people couldn't afford, but that dignity was something no amount of money could buy or steal. Marcus closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of his living room, the note still in his hands, trying to figure out what kind of man he wanted to be. The kind who refused help on principle? The kind who accepted it with gratitude? The kind who questioned the motives behind unexpected generosity? Outside, the Georgia night continued its usual symphony, crickets and distant traffic, and the whisper of wind through pine trees. Inside, Marcus Hill sat with the weight of an impossible decision and the knowledge that nothing would ever quite be the same again. Because $50,000 wasn't just money. It was possibility. It was security. It was the difference between drowning and learning to swim. And all it had cost him was the simple act of being human when the moment demanded it. Marcus finally stood, walking to Zoe's room one more time. She'd shifted in her sleep, one arm thrown over her favorite stuffed elephant. He watched her breathe, steady and safe, and made his decision. Tomorrow, he'd figure out the logistics. Tomorrow, he'd process what this meant and what came next. Tomorrow, he'd probably panic about accepting such an enormous gift from a complete stranger. But tonight, just for tonight, Marcus let himself imagine a world where helping someone could actually change everything. Where doing the right thing mattered not just morally, but practically. Where a single father who smelled like engine grease could stand in a diner and end up with something that looked an awful lot like hope. He returned to his bedroom, set his alarm for 6 a.m. like always, and tried to sleep. But his mind kept circling back to that moment in the diner, to Victoria's terrified face, to Blake's sneering confidence, to the sound of glass breaking on linoleum, to the choice to stand when everyone else stayed seated, and to the woman in the expensive car who'd somehow seen past the grease stains and the poverty and the color of his skin to recognize something worth investing in. Marcus didn't know what came next, didn't know if this was the beginning of something good or just a momentary reprieve before the universe returned to its usual indifference. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, tomorrow felt like it might hold something other than another day of barely surviving. That alone was worth whatever consequences followed. Marcus didn't sleep. He told himself he would, that he'd close his eyes and deal with everything in the morning, but his mind refused to quiet. Every time he started to drift, he'd see that number again, $50,000, and his eyes would snap open, heart racing like he'd just run a marathon. At 5:30, he gave up pretending and climbed out of bed. The house was still dark, the morning Georgia sun not yet brave enough to challenge the night. Marcus moved through his routine on autopilot, shower, coffee, the same faded jeans and work shirt he wore every day. But his hand shook as he buttoned the shirt, and he had to pour the coffee twice because the first time he missed the mug entirely. Zoe appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:15, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her braids askew. "Morning, Daddy." "Morning, baby. You sleep okay?" "I had a dream about the treehouse. It had a slide and everything." She climbed onto a kitchen chair, watching him with those two perceptive eyes. He looked tired. "Couldn't sleep much. Adult stuff." "Is it bad adult stuff or good adult stuff?" Marcus paused, the coffee mug halfway to his lips. How did you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes good things felt more terrifying than bad ones because you'd learned not to trust them? "I think it's good, just unexpected." Zoe seemed satisfied with that answer. Marcus made her breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, the routine so familiar he could do it blind. They ate together in comfortable silence, the kitchen gradually brightening as dawn crept through the windows. "Can Jenny come over after school?" Zoe asked around a mouthful of eggs. "We want to work on our science project." "Sure, I'll pick you both up at 3. Marcus cleared their plates, rinsing them in the sink. "You got everything you need for school?" "Yep. Oh, except..." Zoe's face scrunched up in that way that meant she was about to ask for something she thought might be a problem. "Mrs. Patterson said we need poster board for our presentations. The big kind." Marcus did quick mental math. Poster board was what, $3? $4? Yesterday, that calculation would have mattered. Yesterday, he would have been weighing poster board against whether they needed milk or if he could stretch what they had another day. Today, with $50,000 he still couldn't quite believe was real, the calculation felt absurd. "I'll grab some after work," he said. "What color?" Zoe's face lit up like he'd offered her the moon. "Really? Can I get the white one with the sparkly edges?" "If they have it, it's yours." After dropping Zoe at school, Marcus drove to the garage on autopilot. Hill's Auto Repair occupied a converted gas station on the poor side of town, literally the wrong side of the tracks, where the railroad cut Millbrook in half between old money and everybody else. The building was cinder block and determination, with 2 bays, a cramped office, and a parking lot that needed repaving about 10 years ago. Danny was already there when Marcus arrived, The younger man's lanky frame bent over the Honda's brake system. He looked up as Marcus entered, offering a grease-stained grin. "Boss, you're late. I was about to send out a search party." Marcus checked his watch, 6:45. He was 15 minutes later than usual. "Sorry, rough night." "You okay?" Danny straightened, wiping his hands on a rag that only redistributed the grease. At 23, he had the kind of boundless energy that made Marcus feel ancient. "You look like you saw a ghost." "Something like that." Marcus moved to the Honda, examining Danny's work with practiced eyes. The kid was good. Not formally trained, but he had instincts you couldn't teach. Marcus had hired him 8 months ago when Danny showed up asking if there was any work at all, because his mom was sick and they were about to lose their apartment. Marcus understood that desperation intimately. "Brake job looks solid," Marcus said. "Customers picking it up at noon?" "That's what she said. The Ford's ready too, just an oil change, nothing fancy. But that Chevy," Danny grimaced. "I think it's the transmission. Did a full diagnostic yesterday evening. It's not good, boss." Marcus had suspected as much. The Chevy belonged to Mrs. Rodriguez, a widow who worked doubles at the nursing home and could barely afford oil changes, let alone transmission work. "How bad?" "Rebuild's gonna run at least $1,500, maybe $2,000. Marcus closed his eyes. Yesterday, he would have had to tell Mrs. Rodriguez that her car was done, that the repair cost more than the vehicle was worth, that she should start looking for something else. As if people who worked doubles at nursing homes had $2,000 lying around for another car. Today, with that impossible deposit sitting in his business account, the calculation shifted. "Let me talk to her," Marcus said. "See what we can work out." Danny gave him a knowing look. "Boss, you can't keep doing discount work for everybody who can't afford it. I know you got a good heart, but the math doesn't work." "I know." "Do you? Because we're barely keeping the lights on as it is." Danny's voice held genuine concern. "I'm not trying to be a jerk, but if this place goes under, we're both screwed." Marcus wanted to tell him about the money. Wanted to explain that maybe, just maybe, they could afford to be decent human beings and still keep the business afloat. But something held him back. The same instinct that made him check the parking lot before getting out of his truck. The same wariness that came from a lifetime of good things turning complicated. "I'll figure it out," he said instead. "Trust me." They worked in companionable silence for the next few hours. The familiar rhythm of tools and engines providing a meditation Marcus desperately needed. There was something pure about mechanical work. Problems had solutions, causes had effects. Everything operated on principles you could see and touch and understand. Not like life, where doing the right thing could somehow leave you holding $50,000 from a stranger and feeling more uncertain than ever. Around 11, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Hill, this is Victoria Langford. I hope you received my note. I'd very much like to speak with you when you have a moment. Would you be available for coffee this afternoon? I promise I'm not usually this forward, but I think we should talk. Victoria." Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to pretend last night had been some fever dream, and the money would vanish as mysteriously as it appeared. But that was cowardice talking, and whatever else Marcus was, he wasn't a coward. He typed back with grease-stained fingers. "I can do 2 p.m. There's a coffee shop on Main Street next to the hardware store." Her response came within seconds. "Perfect. Thank you, Marcus. I'll see you then." Danny noticed him staring at the phone. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just someone wants to meet. About last night." "Last night? What happened last night?" Marcus realized he hadn't told Danny anything about the diner incident. Hadn't mentioned the confrontation, or the woman, or the impossible gift that followed. "It's complicated. I'll explain later." Mrs. Rodriguez arrived at noon to pick up the Honda, a tired woman in scrubs who looked like she'd aged a decade in the past year. Marcus gave her the good news about the brakes, fixed, safe, ready to go, and then the bad news about the Chevy. $2,000? Mrs. Rodriguez repeated, her accent thickening with stress. "Mr. Hill, I can't." "What if we did 1,000? Marcus heard himself say. "I can source some used parts, and Danny and I will do the labor at cost. It won't be fancy, but it'll get you another couple of years." Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes filled with tears. You would do that? We'll work out a payment plan. 100 a month, no interest. Sound fair? She grabbed his hand with both of hers, squeezing hard. You are a good man, Mr. Hill. A blessing. Thank you. After she left, Danny leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. 1,000 for transmission work? Boss, that doesn't even cover the parts. It covers enough. Does it, though? Danny's expression was troubled. Look, I get it. I do, but charity doesn't keep the lights on. It's not charity, it's business. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag, not meeting Danny's eyes. She'll pay it off, and she'll tell other people we're fair. Word of mouth is the best advertising we've got. Danny didn't look convinced, but he dropped it. They worked through lunch, Marcus forcing down a sandwich that tasted like cardboard while his mind spun through the approaching meeting with Victoria. What did she want? Why meet in person? And why did the thought of facing her again make him more nervous than the confrontation with Blake had? At 1:30, Marcus cleaned up as best he could, scrubbing the worst of the grease from his hands and changing into a slightly less stained shirt he kept in the office. Danny raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. The drive to Main Street took 10 minutes. Millbrook's downtown consisted of one street lined with the kinds of businesses that had survived generations through sheer stubbornness. The hardware store that had been there since 1952, the pharmacy with the ancient soda fountain, the coffee shop that served exactly 2 kinds of coffee and didn't apologize for it. Marcus found parking and sat in his truck for a moment, gathering himself. Through the coffee shop window, he could see Victoria already seated at a corner table. She looked different in daylight, still polished, still clearly wealthy, but somehow more human. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a white blouse that probably cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe, but didn't scream money quite as loudly as the silk outfit from last night. She saw him looking and waved, offering a tentative smile. Marcus took a breath and got out of the truck. The coffee shop smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon, warm and welcoming. Only a handful of other customers occupied the space. A couple of retirees reading newspapers. A young woman on a laptop. Victoria stood as Marcus approached, extending her hand. Marcus, thank you for meeting me. Her handshake was firm, confident. Up close, Marcus could see the faint shadows under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept much better than he had. Of course, Marcus said, settling into the chair across from her. Though I have to admit I'm not sure what we need to talk about. I think you know. Victoria's smile turned wry. The money. That's a good place to start. I can't accept it, Ms. Langford. Victoria, please. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. And yes, you can. You already have. I made sure it was processed in a way that can't be easily reversed. That doesn't make it right. Doesn't it? Victoria tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made Marcus want to look away. Tell me something, Marcus. When you stood up last night, when you put yourself between me and Blake, did you calculate the risk first? Did you weigh the potential consequences? That's different. Is it? You did something without thinking about what you'd get in return. I'm doing the same thing. A waitress appeared, Betty, who'd worked there for 20 years and knew everyone's order by heart. Marcus, the usual, black coffee? Please. And for you, hun? Betty turned to Victoria with the practiced friendliness of someone who could size up a stranger in 3 seconds. The same. Thank you. After Betty left, Victoria continued. I know how this must look. Rich woman throws money at a problem, thinks she can buy her way out of guilt or obligation or whatever. But that's not what this is. Then what is it? Victoria was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the table. Have you ever been surrounded by people who claim to love you but don't actually see you? Who care more about what you represent than who you are? Marcus thought about his own family, his mother who died when Zoe was 3, his father who'd left before Marcus could remember, the foster homes and group facilities that had raised him. He thought about being invisible in rooms full of people, about assumptions made based on skin color and zip code and the car you drove. Yeah, he said quietly. I have. Then you understand. I grew up with every material advantage you could imagine. Best schools, designer clothes, connections that could open any door, but none of it was actually mine. It all came with strings attached. Expectations, obligations, this script I was supposed to follow. Victoria's laugh was bitter. My family has been trying to arrange my marriage to Blake for the past 2 years. Our families have business together. It would be advantageous. Never mind that he's controlling and cruel. Never mind that I've told them 100 times I don't love him. Betty returned with their coffees. Marcus waited until she left before responding. So, last night was me trying to draw a line, to show up somewhere he couldn't follow, couldn't control, to prove to myself I could make one decision that was actually mine. Victoria's hands wrapped around her coffee mug like she was trying to draw warmth from it. And then he followed me anyway, found me anyway, and I realized that all my money, all my privilege, all my family's influence meant absolutely nothing. I was still just a woman being grabbed in a diner with everyone watching and no one helping. Until someone did. Until you did. A complete stranger who had every reason not to get involved, who probably knew it could blow back on you, that men like Blake don't forget perceived slights. Victoria met his eyes. Do you know what that meant to me? To see someone risk something for nothing more than basic human decency? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I just did what anyone should have done. But they didn't. You did. And that matters, Marcus. That matters more than you know. They sat in silence for a moment, the coffee shop sounds filling the space between them. The hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversation, the clink of spoons against ceramic. The money, Marcus finally said. It's too much. It's an investment. I wasn't lying in the note. Victoria pulled out her phone, scrolling to something. I looked you up. Hill's Auto Repair. You've been in business for 5 years, consistently get excellent reviews, known for being honest and fair. But you're barely keeping afloat financially. Marcus stiffened. You investigated me? I researched you. There's a difference. Marcus, I run a foundation that invests in small businesses and community programs. It's what I do. Find people who are trying to build something meaningful and help them succeed. Your garage fits exactly the kind of business we support. A foundation? Marcus frowned. You mean this is, what, official? It can be. I can draw up paperwork, make it a formal grant if that makes you more comfortable. But yes, this is part of what my foundation does. We invest in people who are making a difference in their communities. Marcus took a sip of coffee, buying time to process. And my garage qualifies because you do good work, you treat people fairly, and you're trying to serve a community that desperately needs reliable, affordable auto repair. Do you know how many people in neighborhoods like yours get taken advantage of by shops that overcharge or do unnecessary work? Victoria's passion was evident now, her whole demeanor shifting. You're providing an essential service with integrity. That's exactly what we look for. But last night showed me who you are. Showed me that my instinct to help your business would be money well spent. Victoria set down her phone. Marcus, I'm not trying to buy your silence or your gratitude. I'm not trying to make myself feel better about being born wealthy. I'm trying to do what you did, the right thing, because it's right. You helped me. Let me help you. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to find the flaw in her logic, the catch that had to be hiding somewhere. But the earnestness in her expression, the way she talked about her foundation, the simple fact that she'd taken the time to learn about his business, it all rang true. What would you want in return? He asked carefully. Nothing. Well, not nothing. I'd want you to keep doing what you're doing, running an honest business, treating people fairly, being the kind of person who stands up in diners. Victoria smiled. And maybe, if you're willing, I'd like to stay in touch, as friends. I don't have many of those who see me as just Victoria instead of Victoria Langford, heiress to a fortune she didn't earn. Friends. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications Marcus wasn't sure he was ready to unpack. He thought about the differences between them, the gulf of wealth and privilege, the different worlds they inhabited, the complications that came with crossing those boundaries. But he also thought about the woman sitting across from him, drinking cheap coffee in a small-town shop, asking for something as simple and profound as genuine human connection. I don't know how to be friends with someone like you, Marcus admitted. Someone like me? Someone from... He gestured vaguely, trying to encompass the obvious differences without making them sound like insurmountable obstacles. Different tax bracket? Victoria's smile was sad. I understand. But Marcus, that's exactly why I need friends like you. Everyone in my world speaks the same language, follows the same rules, values the same things. And all of it is fundamentally hollow. You're real. What you did last night was real. I'd rather have one real friend than 100 people who only like the idea of me. Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. But all he saw was loneliness that mirrored his own, the isolation of being fundamentally misunderstood by almost everyone you met. Okay, he said slowly. Friends. But I'm keeping track of every penny of that money. If the business succeeds, I'm paying it back. If it makes you feel better, fine. Though I'd rather you invested it back into the community somehow. Maybe offer apprenticeships for kids who need a skill. Maybe do more discounted work for people like Mrs. Rodriguez. Marcus blinked. How did you know about Mrs. Rodriguez? I didn't, I'm guessing. But am I wrong? He laughed despite himself, some of the tension finally breaking. No, you're not wrong. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing more easily than Marcus would have predicted. Victoria asked about Zoe, about the garage, about Marcus's plans for the business. Marcus found himself telling her about the treehouse Zoe wanted, about Danny's natural talent for mechanical work, about the satisfaction of fixing something broken and returning it better than it was. In turn, Victoria talked about her foundation work, about her frustration with her family's business practices, about feeling trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt suffocating from within. The worst part, she said at one point, is knowing I have resources to help people but being blocked at every turn by family politics. My father controls the trust until I'm 30. I have a foundation, but it's limited. I can do small investments like yours, but the big systemic changes I want to make, those require his approval, and he's more interested in maintaining status quo than actually helping anyone. How old are you now? 26. 4 more years of being treated like a child who can't be trusted with her own inheritance. Victoria's frustration was palpable. And the ironic thing? My father respects Blake precisely because Blake is willing to do whatever it takes to succeed. Ethics don't matter. Kindness doesn't matter. Only results. Sounds like my father would have liked him too, Marcus said. Except my father just left instead of sticking around to enforce his worldview. I'm sorry. Don't be. I learned early that you can't count on people just because they're supposed to be there for you. You can only count on what they actually do. Victoria nodded slowly. Which is why what you did last night mattered so much. You weren't supposed to help me. You had no obligation, but you did it anyway. Marcus checked his watch and swore softly. I need to pick up Zoe in 20 minutes. Of course, I've kept you too long. Victoria stood, then hesitated. Marcus, can I ask you something? Sure. Are you really okay with all this? The money, the foundation explanation, the friendship? I need to know if I'm pushing too hard or making you uncomfortable. Marcus considered the question honestly. Was he okay with it? He still felt off balance, still couldn't quite believe this was happening. But underneath the discomfort was something that felt like hope, fragile and uncertain, but real. I think so, he said. Ask me again in a week when it all feels less surreal. Victoria's smile was genuine, reaching her eyes this time. Deal. And Marcus? Thank you. For last night, for today, for giving me a chance. They walked out together, standing in the afternoon sunshine that painted Main Street in golden light. Victoria's car was parked 2 spots down from Marcus's truck, a black Mercedes sedan that probably cost more than he'd make in 5 years. That your car, or did Bernard drop you off? Marcus asked. Mine. Bernard offered, but I needed to prove to myself I could drive here alone. Baby steps toward independence. She unlocked it with a button press. It's ridiculous, I know. Most people my age have been independent for years. Everyone's got their own journey, Marcus said. No point comparing. Victoria paused with her hand on the car door. You know, Blake used to compare me to other women constantly. Told me I wasn't grateful enough, wasn't sophisticated enough, didn't understand how good I had it. It was exhausting, Always feeling like I was failing some test I didn't know I was taking. Sounds like you're better off without him. I am. I just need to convince my family of that. She climbed into the car, then rolled down the window. I'll text you later this week if that's okay. Maybe we can grab coffee again. Sure, just not somewhere too fancy. I don't own any clothes without grease stains. Victoria laughed, a real, unguarded sound. Marcus, I like you exactly as you are, grease stains and all. She drove away, the Mercedes gliding silently down Main Street. Marcus stood by his truck for a moment, processing everything. A week ago, his biggest concern was whether he could afford poster board for Zoe's school project. Now he had $50,000 in the bank, a friendship with someone from a completely different world, and the strange feeling that his life had just lurched onto a new track without asking his permission. He climbed into his truck and headed toward Zoe's school, his mind still churning. The money would help, immediately and dramatically. He could fix the shop's aging equipment, stock up on parts, maybe even give Danny a raise. He could build Zoe that treehouse without having to choose between it and groceries. But the friendship with Victoria, that felt more complicated. Not bad, just complicated. Because Marcus knew how these things worked. He'd seen it before in different contexts. Rich people who wanted to feel good about themselves by associating with authentic poor people. Slumming as charity, poverty as entertainment. Except Victoria hadn't felt like that. She'd felt genuine, lonely, lost in a different way than Marcus was lost, but lost nonetheless. Maybe that was enough. Maybe two people from different worlds could build something real based on nothing more than mutual recognition of each other's humanity. Or maybe Marcus was being naive, and this would all blow up in his face spectacularly. Either way, it was too late to back out now. The money was in his account. The conversation had happened. The friendship, tentative and uncertain as it was, had been offered and accepted. Zoe was waiting outside the school with her friend Jenny when Marcus pulled up. She bounced to the truck, her earlier excitement about the poster board clearly renewed. Daddy, did you get it? The sparkly one? Marcus realized he'd completely forgotten. Not yet, baby, but I will. Hardware store's still open. Can we go now, please? Sure thing. Hop in, both of you. The drive to the hardware store took 5 minutes. Marcus let the girls chatter about their science project, something involving plants and sunlight, while his mind wandered back to Victoria's words. I'd rather have one real friend than 100 people who only like the idea of me. He understood that more than she probably realized. Marcus had acquaintances, had people he was friendly with, had Danny, who felt like a little brother. But real friends? People who knew him completely and chose to stick around anyway? Those were rare enough to be precious. At the hardware store, Zoe found her sparkly poster board immediately, clutching it like treasure. Marcus also grabbed some lumber he'd been putting off buying, good quality pine that would be perfect for a treehouse. If he was going to do this, he was going to do it right. The cashier rang him up without comment, though Marcus noticed the way his eyes lingered on the quality of wood Marcus rarely could afford. The total came to $87. Marcus paid in cash without wincing, without calculating, without the usual internal debate about whether this purchase was justified. It felt surreal, liberating and terrifying in equal measure. Back at the house, Marcus started dinner while the girls worked on their project at the kitchen table. He made spaghetti and meatballs, Zoe's favorite, and listened to their excited planning with half an ear. The mundane domesticity of it all felt like an anchor, grounding him after a day that had spun increasingly into the unbelievable. His phone buzzed, a text from Victoria. Thank you again for meeting me today. I meant what I said about staying in touch. Also, I did some research on treehouse construction and found some excellent tutorials if you're interested. V. Marcus stared at the message, a smile tugging at his lips despite himself. She'd remembered, had cared enough to follow up, to offer help without being asked. He typed back, appreciate that. Fair warning, I'm better with engines than carpentry, but I'll figure it out. Her response came quickly. Something tells me you figure out most things eventually. Talk soon. Simple words. Friendly, casual, exactly what you'd expect from a new friendship. But they settled something in Marcus's chest, confirmed that maybe this wasn't all in his head, that maybe Victoria really did just want connection without complication. After dinner, Marcus helped Zoe with her homework while Jenny's mom picked her up. Then came bath time, story time, and the familiar ritual of tucking his daughter into bed. Daddy? Zoe's voice was sleepy, her stuffed elephant clutched tight. Are we okay? With money and stuff? The question hit Marcus like a punch. What makes you ask that, baby? You just seem different today. Happier, maybe. And you didn't get all quiet when I asked about the poster board. She yawned. I'm not dumb. I know things have been hard. Marcus sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing her braids. You're too smart for your own good, you know that? So are we okay? Yeah, baby, we're okay. Better than okay, actually. Things are going to get easier for a while. Good. Zoe's eyes were already closing. I'm glad. You work so hard, Daddy. You deserve easier. She was asleep before Marcus could respond, her breathing evening out into the gentle rhythm of childhood dreams. He sat there for a long moment, watching her sleep, feeling the weight and privilege of being someone's entire world. That night, Marcus slept better than he had in months. The money sat in his business account like a promise. The friendship with Victoria felt like possibility. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, tomorrow held something other than grinding survival. He didn't know what came next, didn't know if the universe would let him keep this unexpected grace, or if it was all some cosmic joke with a punchline he hadn't seen yet. But tonight, wrapped in the darkness of his small house, with his daughter sleeping safely down the hall, Marcus let himself believe that maybe doing the right thing really could lead somewhere good, that maybe courage wasn't always punished, that maybe, just maybe, the world was slightly less rigged than he'd always believed. And that hope, fragile, uncertain, but undeniably real, felt like the most valuable thing $50,000 had ever bought. The first real test came 3 days later, on a Friday afternoon when Marcus was elbow-deep in Mrs. Rodriguez's transmission rebuild. Danny had gone to pick up parts, leaving Marcus alone in the shop when the sleek silver BMW pulled into the parking lot. Marcus recognized the car immediately. His hands stilled on the wrench, every muscle in his body tensing with the primal awareness that danger had just arrived wearing expensive cologne and entitlement. Blake stepped out of the BMW like he owned not just the car, but the entire street it occupied. He wore a different suit than the one from the diner, charcoal gray this time, probably Italian, definitely worth more than Marcus's truck. Dark sunglasses hid his eyes, but the set of his jaw broadcasted aggression from 20 feet away. Marcus straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag without breaking eye contact. He'd learned long ago that showing fear to men like Blake was an invitation for worse things to come. Help you with something? Marcus kept his voice level, professional. Blake removed his sunglasses with theatrical precision, revealing eyes that glittered with something cold and mean. You're Marcus Hill. That's what the sign says. Cute. Blake's smile had all the warmth of a shark circling prey. I wanted to meet the man who thought it was smart to put his hands on me. Didn't touch you. Just asked you to leave a woman alone. Semantics. Blake strolled into the garage like he was inspecting property he planned to condemn. His gaze swept over the aging equipment, the oil-stained concrete, the modest setup that represented everything Marcus had built with his own hands. This is quite the operation you've got here. Real salt of the earth stuff. Marcus didn't respond. He'd been baited by better men than Blake, had learned that silence often unnerved bullies more than confrontation. Blake picked up a socket wrench from Marcus's toolbox, examining it with exaggerated interest. You know, I did some research on you, Marcus. Single father, struggling business, living paycheck to paycheck in a house that's probably worth less than my car. It's admirable, really. Very bootstrap American dream. Put the tool down. Or what? Blake set the wrench down anyway, his smile widening. See, here's what I can't figure out. A guy in your position, barely keeping his head above water, one bad month from losing everything, that guy decides to play hero for a woman he's never met. Why? What was the angle? No angle. She needed help. Bullshit. Blake's voice hardened. Everyone has an angle. So what was yours? You thought Victoria would be grateful? Thought maybe she'd throw some money your way out of guilt or obligation? Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. Blake was fishing, trying to provoke a reaction. Men like him operated on the assumption that everyone was as calculating and self-serving as they were. I think you should leave, Marcus said quietly. I'll leave when I'm ready. Blake leaned against the workbench, crossing his arms. Here's the thing, Marcus. Victoria and I have been together for 2 years. Our families have business together. We have an understanding. And then you show up, plain white knight, and suddenly she thinks she can just walk away from all of that. Sounds like that's between you and her. It was. Until you made it your business. Blake's casual demeanor cracked slightly, revealing the anger underneath. Do you have any idea what kind of complications you've created? The questions you've raised? Victoria's father is already asking why she was at some dive diner instead of where she was supposed to be. Why she's suddenly talking about independence and making her own choices. Marcus stayed quiet, his mind racing. This was worse than a simple confrontation. Blake wasn't just angry about the diner incident. He was worried about losing control over Victoria, and by extension, whatever business arrangements connected their families. I want you to stay away from her, Blake said, his voice dropping to something more dangerous. No more coffee dates, no more friendly texts, no more playing the noble savage who rescued the damsel in distress. The casual racism in that last phrase hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he absorbed it the way he'd absorbed hundreds of similar cuts over the years. Reacting was what Blake wanted. Reaction gave him power. Victoria's a grown woman, Marcus said instead. She can decide who she spends time with. Can she? Blake pushed off from the workbench, closing the distance between them. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're taking advantage of a vulnerable moment, manipulating a woman who was upset and confused into thinking you're some kind of hero. That's predatory, Marcus. That's the kind of behavior that gets people in trouble. The threat was barely veiled now. Marcus recognized it for what it was, an attempt to intimidate, to make him back down, to reassert the natural order where men like Blake got what they wanted, and men like Marcus knew their place. You done? Marcus asked. Blake's expression flickered with surprise. He'd clearly expected more deference, more fear. I'm trying to help you here. You're in over your head with people you don't understand. Victoria's world has rules, consequences. You step in the wrong place, say the wrong thing, and you could lose everything. He glanced around the garage meaningfully. Your business, your reputation, your ability to provide for that daughter of yours. That was the line. Mentioning Zoe transformed Blake from an annoyance into a genuine threat. Marcus felt something cold and dangerous settle in his chest, the kind of protective fury that made good men capable of terrible things. Get out, Marcus said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Right now. Blake must have seen something in Marcus's eyes that finally penetrated his entitled arrogance. He took a step back, hands raised in mock surrender. Easy, friend. I'm just having a conversation. We're done conversing. You came here to threaten me, to try to scare me into staying away from Victoria. But here's what you don't understand. I don't scare easy, and I definitely don't take orders from people who think money gives them the right to control other people's lives. Big words from a small-time mechanic. Maybe. But at least I can sleep at night knowing I treat people with respect. Can you say the same? Blake's face flushed dark red. For a moment, Marcus thought he might actually swing, and some part of Marcus almost welcomed it. At least a fight would be honest, straightforward, something he understood. But Blake was smarter than that. Violence left evidence, created liability. Instead, he put his sunglasses back on, that shark smile returning. You're making a mistake, Marcus. A big one. But I guess some people have to learn things the hard way. He walked toward his car, then paused. Oh, and about that $50,000 Victoria gave you? You might want to make sure all your paperwork is in order. Tax implications on gifts that size can be complicated. Would be a shame if the IRS started asking questions you couldn't answer. Blake climbed into his BMW and drove away, the engine's roar an exclamation point on his threats. Marcus stood in the empty garage, his hands shaking now that the confrontation was over, adrenaline flooding his system with nowhere to go. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Victoria. Had a visit from Blake. He's not happy about our friendship. You should know. Her response came within seconds. Are you okay? What did he say? Marcus considered how much to share. Mostly threats, trying to scare me off. I'm fine, but you need to be careful. He seems to think he has some claim on your life. He doesn't. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I never meant to drag you into my family drama. Not your fault, but he mentioned something about tax implications on the money. Is that something I need to worry about? A pause, then, no. It was structured as a business grant through my foundation, all completely legal and documented. Blake's just trying to find leverage. Don't let him get in your head. Marcus wanted to believe her, but Blake's parting shot had hit its target. The last thing Marcus needed was IRS scrutiny, questions about where the money came from, audits he couldn't afford to deal with. Danny returned with the parts 20 minutes later, taking one look at Marcus's face and immediately asking, "What happened?" Marcus told him everything. About Victoria, the money, the foundation, and Blake's visit. Danny listened without interrupting, his expression growing progressively more concerned. "Boss, this is getting complicated," Danny said when Marcus finished. "Rich people drama has a way of rolling downhill and crushing whoever's at the bottom." "I know." "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you just made an enemy of someone with resources and connections and zero moral boundaries. That's dangerous." "What was I supposed to do? Let him assault her in a diner?" "No, of course not. But maybe you could have helped without getting so tangled up afterward. The coffee meetings, the friendship thing. Marcus, that's asking for trouble." Marcus knew Danny was right. The smart play was to take the money, use it to stabilize the business, and keep Victoria at arm's length. Gratitude didn't require friendship. Help didn't require ongoing involvement. But there was something about Victoria that made Marcus want to reject that cold calculus. She'd been genuine at the coffee shop, vulnerable in a way that felt real. And underneath all the wealth and privilege, she was just someone trying to figure out who she was beyond other people's expectations. Marcus understood that struggle intimately. "I hear you," Marcus said, "but I'm not backing down because some entitled punk thinks he can intimidate me. Victoria's been decent to us. The least I can do is be a friend when she clearly needs one." Danny sighed, but he nodded. "Your call, boss. Just be careful, okay? Men like Blake don't fight fair." They worked the rest of the afternoon in relative silence, the transmission rebuild demanding enough attention to quiet Marcus's churning thoughts. But as closing time approached, Marcus's phone buzzed with another message from Victoria. "Can we talk? In person? I know it's last minute, but I'm worried about what Blake might do next. I'm in Millbrook now if you're available." Marcus checked the time. 4:30. He needed to pick up Zoe in an hour, which gave him maybe 40 minutes. He texted back, "I can meet you at the coffee shop. 30 minutes? "Perfect, thank you, Marcus." Danny raised an eyebrow when Marcus explained where he was going. "You sure about this?" "No, but I'm going anyway." The drive to Main Street felt different this time, weighted with the knowledge that Blake was watching, calculating, looking for weaknesses to exploit. Marcus found himself checking his rearview mirror more than usual, scanning for silver BMWs that might be following. Victoria was already at the coffee shop when he arrived, seated at the same corner table they'd occupied before. But her appearance had changed dramatically from their last meeting. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying, her usual polish replaced by something raw and uncertain. She stood when Marcus entered, and before he could say anything, she spoke in a rush. "I'm so sorry. I should have warned you about Blake, about what getting involved with me might mean. I was selfish and short-sighted, and I put you at risk without thinking about the consequences." "Sit down, Victoria. It's okay." "It's not okay." Her voice cracked slightly. "Blake went to your garage. He threatened you, and it's my fault for what? For being a person who needed help? For trying to make a friend?" Marcus kept his voice gentle. "You didn't ask for Blake to be controlling. You didn't ask for your family to prioritize business arrangements over your happiness. None of this is your fault." Victoria sank back into her chair, her hands trembling slightly. Betty appeared with coffee without being asked, her experienced eye reading the situation and deciding discretion was the better part of curiosity. "Blake called my father," Victoria said once Betty left. "Told him I was being influenced by someone inappropriate. That's the word he used, inappropriate. My father's now demanding I come home, that we have a family meeting to discuss my recent behavior." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." Victoria wrapped her hands around the coffee mug. "Part of me wants to tell them all to go to hell, to finally stand up and say I'm an adult and I'll make my own choices. But the other part knows they have leverage, my trust fund, my foundation, my ability to actually help people. They control all of it until I'm 30. Marcus studied her face, seeing the same trapped desperation he'd recognized in the diner. What do you want, Victoria? Not what your family wants, not what makes sense strategically. What do you actually want? She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee like it might hold answers. I want to make my own decisions. I want friends who see me as a person, not an asset to be managed. I want to do meaningful work with my foundation without having to clear every decision through my father's board of advisors. I want... She trailed off, then looked up at Marcus. I want to be brave like you were in that diner. To stand up when it matters, even when it's terrifying. You think I wasn't terrified? Were you? Marcus considered lying, offering the comforting fiction that courage meant the absence of fear. But Victoria deserved honesty. Yeah, I was scared. Scared Blake would press charges, scared he'd come after me or Zoe, scared I'd just made everything worse by getting involved. But I was more scared of what it would mean to do nothing, of what it would teach my daughter about the world if I just sat there and watched. That's what I need to remember, Victoria said softly, that being scared doesn't mean you're doing the wrong thing. Sometimes it means you're finally doing something that matters. They talked for 20 more minutes, Victoria gradually relaxing as the conversation shifted away from Blake and towards safer topics. She asked about the treehouse plans, about Zoe's school project, about Mrs. Rodriguez's transmission. Marcus found himself telling stories about the garage, about customers who became friends, about the satisfaction of fixing something broken. You really love what you do, Victoria observed. Most days. It's honest work. When someone's car doesn't start, I figure out why and fix it. Cause and effect. No politics, no games, just problems and solutions. That sounds peaceful. It can be, though the financial stress kind of ruins the zen. Marcus smiled slightly. Or it used to. Your investment's already making a difference. Ordered new equipment yesterday that I've been putting off for 2 years. Good. That's exactly what it's for. Victoria checked her phone, then grimaced. I should go. My father's expecting me for dinner, and if I'm late, it'll just give him more ammunition about my irresponsible behavior. They walked out together, the late afternoon sun painting everything in amber and gold. Victoria's Mercedes sat next to Marcus's battered truck, the contrast almost comical. Victoria, Marcus said as she unlocked her car. Whatever you decide about your family, about Blake, about all of it, you've got at least one friend who's got your back. No ulterior motives, no business arrangements, just friendship. Her smile was tremulous but genuine. Thank you, Marcus. You have no idea how much that means. She drove away and Marcus headed to Zoe's school, arriving with 5 minutes to spare. His daughter bounced out with her usual energy, chattering about her day before they'd even left the parking lot. Daddy, guess what? Mrs. Patterson said our plant project was the best in the class. Jenny and I are going to present it at the science fair next month. That's fantastic, baby. I'm proud of you. Can we celebrate? Maybe get ice cream? Marcus thought about the $50,000, about how celebrating small victories used to require careful budgeting and mental calculations. Absolutely. What flavor are you thinking? Chocolate, with rainbow sprinkles. They stopped at the local ice cream shop, a family-owned place that had been serving Millbrook for 40 years. Marcus got his usual vanilla, Zoe got her chocolate with enough sprinkles to constitute a health hazard, and they sat at a wobbly outdoor table watching the Friday afternoon traffic drift by. Daddy? Zoe's voice had that particular tone that meant a serious question was coming. Yeah, baby? Are you dating that lady from the diner? Marcus nearly choked on his ice cream. What? No, why would you think that? Because you've been texting a lot and you went to meet her for coffee and you get this weird look on your face when you talk about her. I do not get a weird look. You totally do. It's like soft, like when you look at pictures of Mama. The mention of Zoe's mother, Marcus's high school girlfriend who died in a car accident when Zoe was 3, hit him harder than expected. Victoria's just a friend, Zoe. Someone I helped who's trying to help us back, that's all. Okay. Zoe seemed satisfied, returning her attention to her ice cream. But if you did want to date someone, that would be okay. You know that, right? You don't have to be alone forever just because Mama's gone. The wisdom in those words, coming from an 8-year-old mouth, made Marcus's throat tight. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just finally noticed. They finished their ice cream as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text, but he ignored it, choosing to be fully present with his daughter for this perfect, ordinary moment that felt precious in its simplicity. Later, after dinner and homework and the bedtime routine, Marcus finally checked his messages. One from Victoria. Made it through dinner. Father lectured for an hour about responsibility and family obligations. Blake was there, smirking the whole time. But I didn't back down. Didn't apologize for having coffee with a friend. Small victory, but it felt important. Marcus smiled and typed back. That's not a small victory. That's you standing up for yourself. Keep going. The second message was from an unknown number, and Marcus's stomach dropped as he read it. You should ask your new friend Victoria about the Langford Foundation's tax status. Interesting reading. Might want to make sure you're not caught up in something that could cost you everything. A concerned citizen. The message was unsigned, but Marcus didn't need a signature to know it came from Blake or someone working for him. The threat was clear: back off or face consequences that could destroy everything Marcus had built. Marcus sat on his couch in the darkness, the phone's screen casting shadows across his face. He could feel the walls closing in, the complications multiplying, the simple act of helping someone in a diner metastasizing into something that threatened everything he'd worked for. The smart move was obvious. Return the money, cut ties with Victoria, apologize to Blake for the misunderstanding, and retreat back to the safety of invisibility. But Marcus had never been good at taking the smart move when it conflicted with his principles. And something about Blake's tactics, the threats, the intimidation, the casual assumption that Marcus would fold under pressure, lit a fire in his chest that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with stubborn refusal to be controlled. He typed a message to Victoria. Got a weird text, someone suggesting there might be tax issues with your foundation. Any truth to that? Her response took longer this time, and when it came, Marcus could feel the frustration in every word. No. The foundation is completely legitimate, properly registered, fully audited. Blake's trying to scare you with lies because actual facts don't support his narrative. I'm so sorry he's dragging you into this. Marcus believed her. Or maybe he wanted to believe her badly enough that it amounted to the same thing. Either way, he made his decision. Stop apologizing. You didn't create this situation. Blake did by being a controlling asshole. I'm not backing down because someone's trying to intimidate me. We're friends. That's not negotiable. Victoria's response was immediate. You're a good man, Marcus Hill. Better than you probably realize. Marcus set his phone aside and stared at the ceiling, wondering if being a good man was enough when the world seemed determined to punish you for it. Wondering if the courage he'd shown in the diner was sustainable over the long haul, through the grinding reality of threats and complications and risks to everything he held dear. He thought about Zoe sleeping down the hall, about the garage that represented years of backbreaking work, about the fragile stability he'd finally achieved. All of it could be jeopardized by refusing to back down, by insisting on friendship with someone whose world operated by rules Marcus didn't understand. But he also thought about the look on Victoria's face in the coffee shop, about the loneliness he'd recognized in her eyes, about the simple human need for connection without calculation. And he thought about what he wanted Zoe to learn about courage and integrity and the cost of doing what was right even when it was hard. In the end, the choice wasn't really a choice at all. Marcus had learned long ago that you couldn't build a life worth living on the foundation of backing down from bullies, that the only way to teach his daughter about dignity was to live it himself, regardless of the cost. So he would keep the money, keep the friendship, and deal with whatever consequences came next. Because the alternative, retreating into safety at the expense of his principles, was a kind of death Marcus refused to accept. The threats would continue. Blake would escalate. The complications would multiply. But Marcus had survived worse than entitled rich boys with fragile egos. He'd survived foster care and poverty and systemic racism and the soul-crushing grind of barely keeping his head above water. He could survive this too. And maybe, just maybe, he'd help Victoria survive it as well. Not because he expected anything in return, not because of the money or the investment or any ulterior motive, simply because that's what friends did. They stood up when standing up mattered, even when the cost was high and the outcome was uncertain. Marcus closed his eyes and let sleep come, his decision made, his path forward clear. Whatever tomorrow brought, he'd face it the same way he'd faced everything else, with quiet determination, stubborn integrity, and the unshakable conviction that some things were worth fighting for. Even when the fight seemed impossible to win, the escalation came exactly 1 week later, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Marcus was underneath a Nissan diagnosing a coolant leak when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. "Mr. Hill, this is Janet Cooper from the Georgia Department of Revenue." Marcus's stomach dropped. He rolled out from under the car, sitting up so fast he nearly hit his head on the frame. "Yes?" "I'm calling regarding your business, Hill's Auto Repair. We've received some information suggesting there may be discrepancies in your reported income for the current tax year. We'd like to schedule an audit." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. An audit. The exact threat Blake had made, now manifesting with bureaucratic efficiency. "I don't understand," Marcus said, keeping his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. "My accountant handles everything. All my filings are up to date." "I'm sure they are, Mr. Hill. This is likely just a formality. However, when we receive credible information about potential unreported income, we're obligated to investigate." Her tone was professional, neither warm nor cold. "Could you come to our office Thursday at 10 a.m.? Marcus thought about the $50,000, about whether it had been properly documented, about tax implications he didn't understand. "Thursday works. Can you tell me what specific information you received?" "We'll discuss everything during your appointment. Please bring all relevant financial documentation for the current year, bank statements, receipts, contracts, anything related to business income or expenses." After she hung up, Marcus sat on the garage floor, his mind racing. Danny appeared from the office, took one look at Marcus's face, and immediately asked what was wrong. Marcus explained about the call, about the audit, about the timing that was too convenient to be coincidental. "Blake," Danny said immediately, "he's trying to bury you in legal problems." "Seems like it." "Boss, this is serious. Tax audits can destroy small businesses even when you haven't done anything wrong. The time, the legal fees, the stress, it's designed to crush you." Marcus knew Danny was right. He also knew that panicking wouldn't help. "I need to call Victoria, find out exactly how that money was documented." He stepped outside for privacy and dialed Victoria's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright. "Marcus, I was just thinking about you. I found an amazing program in Atlanta that teaches automotive skills to at-risk youth. I thought maybe we could—" "Victoria, I need to ask you about the foundation money. How exactly was it documented?" The brightness in her voice dimmed immediately. "What happened?" Marcus explained about the call from the Department of Revenue, about the scheduled audit, about his certainty that Blake was behind it. "That bastard," Victoria said, her voice tight with fury. "He's using his connections to weaponize government agencies against you." "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I never thought he'd—" "I need to know if the money was properly documented, if there's anything that could be interpreted as unreported income." "No, absolutely not. It was structured as a legitimate business grant from the Langford Foundation to Hill's Auto Repair. There's a formal agreement, proper tax documentation, everything filed correctly. My foundation lawyer made sure of it specifically because grants like this can be complicated." She paused. "But Marcus, even if everything is perfectly legal, an audit is still a nightmare. The time investment alone could cripple your business." "I know. Let me help. My foundation has lawyers who specialize in this exact thing. They can represent you, make sure you're protected, deal with all the bureaucratic nonsense so you can focus on your business." Marcus's first instinct was to refuse, to handle this himself the way he handled everything. But pride was a luxury he couldn't afford right now, not when Zoe's stability depended on the garage staying afloat. "Okay," he said. "Thank you. I'm also going to talk to my father. Blake is using family connections to do this, which means my father probably knows about it. He might not have authorized it, but he's allowing it. That stops now." "Victoria, I don't want to create more problems between you and your family." "You're not creating anything. Blake is. And my father needs to understand that I won't tolerate him using business leverage to control my personal life." Her voice held a steel Marcus hadn't heard before. I'm done being managed like a portfolio asset. After they hung up, Marcus returned to the garage where Danny was pretending to work, while obviously waiting for an update. Victoria's sending lawyers, Marcus said, and apparently going to war with her family over this. Is that a good thing? I don't know, but it's happening whether I want it to or not. The rest of the day crawled by. Marcus's attention fractured between actual work and spiraling anxiety about the audit. He kept making mistakes, dropping tools, losing track of which car he was working on, forgetting basic procedures he could normally do in his sleep. By the time he picked up Zoe from school, Marcus felt wrung out, exhausted by stress that had nowhere to go. Zoe noticed immediately, her small hand finding his as they walked to the truck. Bad day, Daddy? Yeah, baby. Just some grown-up problems. Want to talk about it? Marcus looked down at his daughter's earnest face and felt something crack in his chest. Just some stuff with the business. Nothing for you to worry about. But you're worried. A little bit, but we'll figure it out. We always do. That night, after Zoe was asleep, Marcus's phone rang again. This time, it was a number with an Atlanta area code. Mr. Hill, my name is David Chen. I'm an attorney with Morrison and Associates. Victoria Langford asked me to reach out regarding your upcoming audit. They talked for 45 minutes, Chen asking detailed questions about the garage's finances, about the grant from Victoria's foundation, about every interaction Marcus had documented. The lawyer's calm competence was reassuring, but it also highlighted how far out of his depth Marcus was. The good news, Chen said finally, is that everything appears to be properly documented. The grant was legitimate, appropriately filed, and well within legal parameters. The audit will likely find nothing wrong. But? Marcus heard the hesitation in the lawyer's voice. But the process itself is punishing. They'll want to examine everything, not just the grant, but all your business dealings. Every receipt, every transaction, every tax filing for the past 3 years. It's invasive, time-consuming, and designed to find something even when there's nothing to find. So what do I do? You comply fully, provide everything they ask for, and let me handle the actual interactions. I'll be present at the meeting Thursday. With proper legal representation, we can streamline this and hopefully wrap it up quickly. Chen paused. Mr. Hill, I should tell you, this kind of targeted audit, especially one that comes so soon after a legitimate business transaction, has all the hallmarks of harassment. If we can prove that, there could be consequences for whoever initiated it. Marcus thought about Blake's smirking face, about the casual cruelty of using bureaucratic systems as weapons. How do we prove it? That's complicated, but Ms. Langford seems to think she can trace this back to its source. She's quite determined. After the call ended, Marcus sat in the darkness of his living room, trying to process everything. A week ago, his biggest concern was whether he could afford poster board. Now he was dealing with lawyers and audits and the fallout from standing up to a man who viewed other people's lives as pieces on a chessboard. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Talked to my father. He claims he knew nothing about Blake's tactics, but I don't believe him. Either way, I made it clear that if he wants any relationship with me going forward, this stops now. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this. Marcus typed back, not your fault, and I'm not in the middle. I chose a side when I stood up in that diner. No regrets. You're a better person than most of the people I've known my entire life. Or just stubborn. Maybe both. Wednesday passed in a blur of gathering documents, organizing files, and trying to keep the garage running while his mind spun with worst-case scenarios. Danny picked up the slack without complaint, handling customers and repairs with an efficiency that reminded Marcus why he'd hired the kid in the first place. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped by to make her first payment on the transmission repair, $100 in cash, carefully counted out with pride. My sister says I should take my business somewhere cheaper, she told Marcus. But I told her you can't put a price on honesty. You treat people right, Mr. Hill. That matters. The words hit Marcus harder than they should have. This was what he was fighting for. Not just his business, but the trust of people like Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd been burned by predatory shops their whole lives. The idea that Blake's vendetta could destroy that made Marcus's hands shake with suppressed fury. Thursday morning arrived with gray skies that matched Marcus's mood. He dressed in his only suit, a cheap black thing he'd bought for funerals and court appearances, and met David Chen in the parking lot of the Department of Revenue building. Chen was exactly what Marcus expected from a high-powered attorney, mid-40s, impeccably dressed, carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly mortgage. But his handshake was firm and his eyes were kind. "Ready?" Chen asked. "As I'll ever be." The audit lasted 3 hours. Janet Cooper turned out to be a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and the kind of bureaucratic thoroughness that missed nothing. She went through every document Marcus had brought, asking questions that seemed designed to trip him up, looking for inconsistencies that didn't exist. Chen guided Marcus through it with practiced ease, knowing exactly when to let Marcus answer and when to step in with legal clarification. The lawyer's presence transformed the dynamic, making it clear this wasn't some small-time mechanic who could be bullied into admissions or mistakes. Finally, Cooper sat back, her expression unreadable. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Hill. The grant from the Langford Foundation was properly documented and appropriately reported. I see no evidence of unreported income or tax irregularities." Marcus felt some of the tension drain from his shoulders. "So we're done?" "With this particular inquiry, yes. However, I should note that we take anonymous tips seriously, and whoever reported you clearly had specific information about your financial situation. That concerns me from a privacy standpoint." Chen leaned forward. "Are you able to tell us anything about the source of this tip?" Cooper hesitated, then said carefully, "I can't reveal specifics, but I can say that the information came from someone claiming to have direct knowledge of Mr. Hill's business practices. The tip alleged unreported cash income and possible tax fraud. Obviously, none of that appears to be true." "So someone with a grudge made false accusations to trigger an audit," Chen said. "That's harassment, Ms. Cooper. Possibly criminal harassment. That's above my pay grade to determine. But if Mr. Hill wants to pursue that angle, he'd need to file a complaint through proper channels." Cooper began gathering her files. "Mr. Hill, your business appears to be in good standing. I'm sorry for the inconvenience." Outside, standing in the parking lot under those gray skies, Marcus finally let himself breathe. "That went well," Chen said. "Better than expected, actually. Cooper's one of the fair ones. Some auditors would have dragged this out for months just to justify their existence. What happens now?" "Now we document everything, and I write a very detailed letter to the Department of Revenue about the suspicious timing and apparent malicious intent behind this audit. It won't lead to criminal charges. Those are nearly impossible to prove, but it creates a paper trail. If Blake tries this again, we have evidence of a pattern." Marcus shook the lawyer's hand. "Thank you. What do I owe you?" "Ms. Langford's foundation is covering my fees. Consider it part of their investment in your business." Chen smiled. "Though, between you and me, I think she'd do this for free. She's quite protective of her friends." After Chen left, Marcus sat in his truck for a long moment, letting the relief wash through him. The audit was over. His business was clean. Blake's attempt to bury him in legal problems had failed. But the victory felt hollow somehow, tainted by the knowledge that this was just one battle in a war Marcus hadn't asked to fight. Blake would try again, the threats would continue, and eventually, something would stick. His phone rang. Victoria, her voice breathless with anxiety. "How did it go?" "Clean. Everything checked out. The lawyer was great." "Oh, thank God." Marcus could hear actual tears in her voice. "I was so worried. Blake's been making threats all week about how he was going to destroy you, and I couldn't—" "Victoria, breathe. I'm okay. We're okay. This is all my fault. If I hadn't asked you to meet for coffee, if I hadn't involved you in my family drama—" "Stop. You didn't force me to do anything. I made my choices and I stand by them." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "My father wants to meet you." Marcus blinked. "What?" "He called me this morning, said he's been hearing about you from Blake, from his business associates, from everyone except me. He wants to form his own opinion." She sounded nervous. "I know it's a lot to ask, but would you be willing? Maybe this weekend?" Every instinct Marcus had screamed that this was a terrible idea. Meeting Victoria's father meant stepping further into her world, accepting more complications, giving Blake more ammunition. The smart play was to refuse politely and maintain the boundaries that might protect him. But Marcus had never been good at the smart play. "Okay," he heard himself say. When and where? Saturday afternoon? There's a restaurant in Atlanta he likes. I know it's a drive, but I'll make it work. After they hung up, Marcus started the truck and headed back to Millbrook, his mind churning with questions about what Victoria's father wanted, what this meeting meant, and whether he was walking into another trap. Danny was handling a brake job when Marcus returned to the garage. He took one look at Marcus's face and grinned. Audit went okay? Better than okay. Clean sweep. Hell yes, I knew Blake was full of it. Danny's expression turned serious. But he's going to try again, isn't he? Probably, but right now I'm just going to enjoy not being crushed by the IRS. The rest of Thursday and all of Friday passed in relative peace. Marcus caught up on work that had piled up during the audit preparation, finally finished Mrs. Rodriguez's transmission, and even started sketching out plans for Zoe's treehouse. Friday evening, he broke the news to Zoe that he needed to go to Atlanta on Saturday. Can I come? She asked immediately. Not this time, baby. It's a business meeting. Boring grown-up stuff. Is it about that lady, Victoria? Marcus hesitated. Yeah, her father wants to meet me. Zoe's eyes went wide. That's a big deal. Like, meet the family big deal. It's not like that. We're just friends, remember? Uh-huh. Friends who have fancy meetings with each other's families. Zoe's grin was knowing beyond her years. Daddy, it's okay if you like her. I already told you that. I'm going to call Mrs. Patterson and ask if you can spend Saturday at Jenny's house. You're changing the subject. Yes, I am. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather, clear skies, comfortable temperatures, the kind of day that made Georgia feel like the best place on earth. Marcus dropped Zoe at Jenny's house, endured more knowing looks from his 8-year-old, and started the hour-long drive to Atlanta. Victoria had texted him the restaurant name, something French that Marcus couldn't pronounce. He'd looked it up online and immediately regretted it. The prices weren't listed, which meant they were astronomical. The dress code was business formal. The reviews used words like exquisite and refined, and not for the faint of heart. Marcus wore his funeral suit and hoped it would be enough. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a gleaming high-rise in downtown Atlanta. Marcus felt underdressed the moment he walked through the door, where a host in a tuxedo looked at him like he'd wandered in from a homeless shelter. Reservation? The host asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer was no. I'm meeting the Langford party. The host's entire demeanor shifted. Of course, sir. Right this way. He led Marcus through a dining room that looked like something from a movie. White tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, waiters moving with choreographed precision. Every table was occupied by people who looked important, who wore wealth like a second skin, who belonged in places like this. Marcus had never felt more out of place in his life. Victoria waited at a table near the back, standing when she saw him. She wore a navy dress that was elegant without being flashy, her hair pulled back in a simple style. But it was the man beside her who captured Marcus's attention. Richard Langford looked exactly like what he was. Old money, old power, old expectations. He was in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of posture that came from generations of people telling you the world was yours. His suit probably cost what Marcus made in 6 months. Marcus, Victoria said, her voice tight with nerves. Thank you for coming. This is my father, Richard Langford. Dad, this is Marcus Hill. Richard extended his hand and Marcus shook it, noting the firm grip that was probably meant to communicate dominance. Mr. Hill, I've heard quite a bit about you. I'm sure you have, Marcus said, keeping his voice neutral. Pleasure to meet you, sir. They sat, and immediately a waiter appeared to take drink orders. Richard ordered some wine Marcus had never heard of. Victoria asked for water. Marcus did the same. So, Richard said once the waiter left, you're the mechanic who's caused quite a stir in my daughter's life. Marcus met his eyes directly. I'm the mechanic who helped your daughter when someone was hurting her. Everything else followed from that. Indeed. Richard's expression was unreadable. Victoria tells me you refused her initial attempt to thank you, that you only accepted the money when she structured it as a business grant. That speaks to character. Speaks to not wanting charity, sir. There's a difference between helping someone and expecting payment for basic human decency. Yet you took the money eventually, because she made a compelling case that it was an investment in a business that serves the community, And because I've got a daughter to feed and pride doesn't put food on the table. Richard's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Honest, I appreciate that. He leaned back as the waiter returned with their drinks. Mr. Hill, I'm going to be direct with you because I suspect you'd prefer that to polite dancing around the point. I would. My daughter's friendship with you has created complications. Blake Morrison's family and mine have business relationships going back decades. His father is a personal friend, and Blake himself, despite his flaws, represents a stabilizing influence in Victoria's life. Dad, Victoria started, but Richard held up a hand. Let me finish, sweetheart. Mr. Hill, I'm told you're aware that Blake can be possessive, that he has a temper, that perhaps he's not the ideal partner for my daughter. Richard's gaze never left Marcus's face. What you may not be aware of is that Blake's father controls significant investments in several of my companies. If Victoria publicly humiliates Blake by rejecting him for, forgive me, a mechanic from a small town, there will be business consequences. Marcus kept his voice level. With respect, sir, your business arrangements aren't my concern. My concern is that your daughter was being assaulted in a diner and needed help. What happens between her and Blake is between them. But I'm not going to apologize for doing the right thing, and I'm not going to end a friendship because it's inconvenient for your balance sheet. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush. Victoria looked horrified. The nearby tables had gone quiet, people probably sensing the tension. Then Richard Langford did something unexpected. He laughed, a genuine surprise sound that seemed to catch even him off guard. You know, Richard said, the last person who spoke to me like that was my father, and he's been dead for 15 years. He took a sip of his wine. I can see why Victoria values your friendship, Mr. Hill. You're refreshingly direct in a world that traffics in careful words and hidden meanings. Marcus didn't relax. This felt like a test, and he wasn't sure he'd passed or failed. Here's the truth, Richard continued. Blake's been making noise about your interference, about inappropriate influence on my daughter, about how you're some kind of opportunist looking to take advantage. I came here prepared to believe him, prepared to offer you a substantial sum to step back and let Victoria's life return to normal. Dad! Victoria's voice was sharp with betrayal. But I can see now that would be insulting to both of you. Richard's expression softened slightly. Mr. Hill, I may prioritize business over many things, but I'm not blind to my daughter's happiness. And I've never seen her as animated, as engaged, as genuinely herself as she's been these past 2 weeks. If a friendship with you is part of that, then perhaps the business complications are worth navigating. Marcus glanced at Victoria, who looked stunned. So what are you saying, sir? I'm saying that I'm willing to reconsider my assumptions about you, about Blake, about what's best for Victoria. Richard set down his wine glass. I'm also saying that this won't be easy. Blake won't back down quietly. There will be social consequences, business complications, and considerable pressure from people who think they know what's best for my daughter. I can handle pressure, Marcus said quietly. I'm sure you can. But can you handle being scrutinized by people looking for any excuse to prove you're not good enough? Can you handle the whispers, the assumptions, the constant suspicion that you're using my daughter for her money? Marcus thought about a lifetime of being judged, dismissed, and underestimated because of his skin color, his background, his zip code. I've been handling that my whole life, Mr. Langford. What's a few more rich people thinking I don't belong? Richard studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Victoria, you chose well. This is a man of substance. He signaled the waiter. Now, shall we order? I find conversations about character work better over good food. The meal that followed was surreal. They talked about Marcus's garage, about Zoe, about Victoria's foundation work. Richard asked intelligent questions about automotive repair, about small business challenges, about Marcus's plans for growth. He talked about his own business, real estate development, investment portfolios, the kind of wealth that accumulated across generations. And slowly, carefully, the three of them found a rhythm that worked. Richard stopped performing the role of intimidating patriarch. Victoria relaxed enough to laugh. Marcus discovered that beneath the old money exterior, Richard Langford was actually capable of genuine conversation. One more thing, Richard said as they finished dessert. Blake is going to escalate when he learns about this meeting. He'll see it as betrayal, as choosing you over him. You need to be prepared for that. What kind of escalation are we talking about? The kind that goes beyond anonymous tax tips. Blake can be vindictive when he feels wronged, and his father has resources that make my audit concerns look quaint. Richard's expression was serious. I'll do what I can to mitigate the damage, but I can't control everything. You should know what you're walking into. Marcus met his eyes directly. I appreciate the warning, but I'm not backing down because someone might make my life difficult. That's not how I operate. No, Richard said softly. I don't imagine it is. They parted ways outside the restaurant, Victoria walking Marcus to his truck while Richard waited by his own car. Thank you, Victoria said, for coming, for being honest with my father, for not letting him intimidate you into taking money to disappear. He really was going to offer me money? Absolutely, probably a lot of it. She smiled. But he respects you now. I could tell. You stood up to him the same way you stood up to Blake. That matters to him more than he'd admit. Marcus looked back at Richard, who was on his phone, probably already dealing with the fallout this meeting would create. Your father's not what I expected. He's complicated. He genuinely loves me, but he's spent so long thinking about business and legacy that he forgets people aren't assets to be managed. Victoria's expression was soft. Today reminded him of that. You reminded him. Marcus drove home as the sun set, his mind processing everything. The audit was behind him. Victoria's father was an unexpected ally. The friendship was no longer a secret thing happening in coffee shops, but an acknowledged reality that people would have opinions about. And Blake Morrison was somewhere out there, planning his next move, wounded and angry and dangerous. But for tonight, Marcus chose to focus on the victories. He'd survived the audit, made it through dinner with Richard Langford, maintained his integrity in the face of pressure that would have broken lesser men. When he picked up Zoe from Jenny's house, she immediately asked how it went. Better than expected, Marcus said honestly. Did he like you? I think so. Or at least he respects me. Good. Zoe buckled her seatbelt with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted the outcome. Because you're awesome, and anyone who doesn't see that is dumb. Marcus laughed, some of the day's tension finally releasing. Thanks, baby. That night, after Zoe was asleep, Marcus sat on his back porch looking at the stars. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. My father just called. He said, and I quote, your mechanic friend has more backbone than most men I do business with. High praise from Richard Langford. Marcus smiled and typed back. Tell him I appreciate that. And tell him I'm not going anywhere. I already did. He said he'd expect nothing less. Marcus set the phone aside and let the quiet Georgia night settle around him. Somewhere in Atlanta, Blake was probably learning about the meeting, about Richard's shifting allegiance, about how his careful campaign to isolate and destroy Marcus had just gotten significantly more complicated. Let him come, Marcus thought. Let him bring whatever he had. Because Marcus Hill had spent his entire life proving he belonged in spaces that told him he didn't. He'd survived poverty, racism, loss, and the grinding challenge of single parenthood. He'd built a business from nothing, raised a daughter who knew her worth, and maintained his integrity in a world that constantly offered easier paths. Blake Morrison, entitled, cruel, threatened by anyone who challenged his control, was just another obstacle. Bigger than some, but not insurmountable. Never insurmountable. Marcus went inside, checked on Zoe one last time, and climbed into bed. Tomorrow he'd go back to the garage, back to the familiar rhythm of fixing what was broken, back to the life he'd built one honest decision at a time. Whatever came next, he'd face it the same way he'd faced everything else, with quiet courage, stubborn integrity, and the absolute refusal to let anyone else define his worth. The storm was coming. Marcus could feel it building, but he'd weathered storms before, and he was still standing. The storm broke on a Monday morning 3 weeks after the dinner with Richard Langford, and it came from a direction Marcus hadn't anticipated. He was opening the garage when a sheriff's deputy pulled into the parking lot. Marcus's stomach dropped. Official vehicles never brought good news, but he kept his expression neutral as the deputy approached. Marcus Hill? That's me. I need you to come with me, sir. There's been an incident involving your vehicle. Marcus's mind raced. His truck was right here. What kind of incident? A hit and run last night. Witness reported a vehicle matching your truck's description leaving the scene. We need to inspect your vehicle and ask you some questions. The setup was so obvious it would have been laughable if it weren't terrifying. Marcus looked at his truck, no new damage, no signs of any collision, but he also knew that facts mattered less than accusations when you looked like him and the accuser had resources. Deputy, my truck hasn't left my driveway since Saturday. I can prove where I was last night. That's what we need to establish, sir. If you could come with me to the station, we can clear this up quickly. Danny arrived just as Marcus was explaining the situation. Boss, this is insane. Your truck's been here all weekend. I saw it yesterday when I dropped off those parts. Can you testify to that? The deputy asked. Absolutely. But testimony wasn't enough to prevent Marcus from spending the next 4 hours at the sheriff's station, answering questions about his whereabouts, providing his phone's GPS data, explaining over and over that his truck couldn't have been involved in a hit and run when it had been parked at his house with Zoe inside watching movies. The deputy, a middle-aged man named Carson, who seemed more resigned than aggressive, finally sighed and closed his notebook. Mr. Hill, I'm going to be straight with you. This complaint came from someone with connections, someone who wanted us to take it very seriously. But your alibi checks out, your truck shows no damage, and frankly, the whole thing smells like harassment. Can you tell me who filed the complaint? Anonymous tip, but the caller had specific details about your vehicle that suggest they know you personally. Carson's expression was sympathetic. Look, I can't prove anything, but if I were you, I'd document everything, every interaction, every threat, every suspicious incident, because whoever's doing this isn't going to stop until they get what they want, or you make it too costly to continue. Marcus left the station feeling hollowed out. He'd lost half a day of work, had to arrange emergency childcare for Zoe, and knew with absolute certainty that Blake was behind this. The question was what came next. His phone showed 7 missed calls from Victoria. He called her back from the parking lot. Marcus, I've been trying to reach you for hours. Blake just showed up at my office making threats. He said, her voice caught. He said if I didn't end our friendship immediately, he'd make sure you lost everything. Your business, your custody of Zoe, everything. The mention of Zoe made Marcus's blood run cold. He threatened my daughter? He implied that a single father with a criminal record wouldn't be considered a fit parent. I don't have a criminal record. I know that. But Blake was suggesting he could create one. False charges, planted evidence, the kind of things that are hard to disprove even when they're completely fabricated. Victoria's voice shook with fury. Marcus, I'm so sorry. This has gone too far. I should never have— Don't, Marcus interrupted. Don't apologize for him. Don't take responsibility for his actions. Blake is making his own choices here. But he's making them because of me. Because I won't do what he wants. Marcus leaned against his truck, exhaustion washing over him. Victoria, can I ask you something? Anything. What do you want? Not what makes sense strategically, not what minimizes damage. What do you actually want? She was quiet for a long moment. I want Blake out of my life permanently. I want to run my foundation without family interference. I want friends I chose, not connections arranged by my father. And I want to stop feeling like I'm constantly apologizing for existing as my own person. Then that's what we fight for. But the cost to you is mine to decide. Stop trying to protect me, Victoria. I'm a grown man. I know what I'm risking, and I'm choosing to risk it anyway. Why? The question was almost a whisper. Why are you willing to sacrifice so much for someone you barely know? Marcus thought about that night in the diner, about the look in Victoria's eyes when Blake grabbed her, about the fundamental wrongness of watching someone be hurt and doing nothing. Because some things matter more than convenience. Because backing down from bullies just makes them stronger. And because you're not just someone I barely know, you're my friend. That means something to me. Victoria's breath hitched. You're a better person than I deserve. That's not true. But I appreciate the sentiment. Marcus checked his watch, 2:30. I need to pick up Zoe soon, but we should talk strategy. Blake's escalating, which means he's getting desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. My father suggested the same thing. He wants to meet with both of us. Tomorrow, if you're available. They arranged the details and hung up. Marcus drove to Zoe's school, arriving early enough to sit in the parking lot and think. Blake's threat about custody was the line in the sand. Marcus could handle attacks on his business, on his reputation, even on his freedom, but threatening his daughter was a declaration of war. Zoe climbed into the truck, chattering about her day, oblivious to the storm gathering around them. Marcus listened with half an ear, making appropriate responses while his mind worked through scenarios and contingencies. That night, after Zoe was asleep, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad and started documenting everything. Every interaction with Blake, every threat, every suspicious incident. Times, dates, witnesses, the hit-and-run accusation, the tax audit, the confrontation at the garage. He wrote until his hand cramped, creating a timeline that painted a clear picture of systematic harassment. His phone rang, Richard Langford calling at nearly midnight. "Mr. Hill, I apologize for the late hour, but I wanted you to know that Blake's father called me this evening. He's threatening to pull his investments from 3 of my major projects unless I convince Victoria to reconcile with Blake." Marcus processed that. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that my daughter's happiness isn't for sale, regardless of the financial consequences. I also told him that his son has been harassing you with false accusations, and that if it continues, I'll make sure everyone in our social circle knows exactly what kind of man Blake Morrison is." "That must have gone over well." Richard's laugh was dry. "About as well as you'd expect. He accused me of betraying decades of friendship over some mechanic. I informed him that the mechanic in question has more integrity in his little finger than Blake has in his entire body. I appreciate that, sir, but I don't want to be the reason your business relationships fall apart. Mr. Hill, I've spent my entire life building wealth and influence. I've made compromises, bent principles, prioritized profit over people more times than I can count. And for what? A daughter who barely speaks to me because she thinks I care more about balance sheets than her well-being." Richard's voice held something Marcus hadn't heard before. Regret. "You reminded me that some things are worth more than money, that doing the right thing matters, even when it's costly. I'm not going to forget that lesson now." They talked strategy for another hour. Richard had resources Marcus couldn't imagine: lawyers, investigators, connections in law enforcement and media. But he also had the wisdom to know that overwhelming force wasn't always the answer. "Blake needs to be discredited, not destroyed," Richard explained. "If we come at him too hard, he becomes a martyr. His father rallies support, and this turns into a protracted war that hurts everyone. But if we let him destroy himself through his own actions while we document everything, then he loses credibility, and we have evidence if things escalate further," Marcus finished. "Exactly, which means we need to be patient. Let him make the next move. Make sure we're ready when he does." Tuesday's meeting took place at Richard's downtown office, a space that occupied 3 floors of a building Richard apparently owned. Victoria was already there when Marcus arrived, looking exhausted but determined. Richard got straight to business. "Blake's father contacted me again this morning. They're threatening a lawsuit claiming you've alienated Victoria's affections and damaged Blake's reputation. It's absurd legally, but it would be expensive and time-consuming to defend against." "Let them sue," Victoria said. "I'll testify about Blake's behavior, about the diner, the threats, everything." "That's exactly what they're counting on," Richard replied. "A public trial means public testimony. Every detail of your personal life examined, media attention, social media speculation. They want to make this so ugly and invasive that Marcus backs away to protect you." Marcus had already considered this. What if I don't back away? What if I document everything Blake's done and take it to the media myself, control the narrative before they can? Richard considered this. Risky. You'd be painting a target on yourself. Every aspect of your life would be scrutinized. It already is. At least this way I'm being proactive instead of reactive. Victoria leaned forward. What if we combined approaches? I make a public statement about Blake's behavior and my decision to end our relationship. You release your documentation of his harassment, and my father simultaneously announces that his companies are severing business ties with the Morrison family due to ethical concerns. That's nuclear, Richard said slowly. It would end any possibility of reconciliation with Blake's father. Good, Victoria replied. I'm done with half measures. Either we're all in on this, or I walk away from the Langford name entirely and start over with nothing. The silence that followed was heavy, Marcus watched Richard's face, seeing the moment a father recognized his daughter had become someone he barely knew, someone stronger, more certain, willing to sacrifice everything for her principles. "You'd really walk away from it all?" Richard asked quietly. "In a heartbeat. Money doesn't mean anything if I'm not free to live my own life." Richard looked at Marcus. "You've been quite the influence on my daughter, Mr. Hill." "She was already this person," Marcus said. "She just needed permission to show it." Richard stood, moving to the window that overlooked downtown Atlanta. 30 years I've been building this empire. 30 years of compromises and calculated decisions and relationships maintained for strategic value. And my daughter is willing to throw it all away for the simple freedom to choose her own friends. He turned back to them. "That should shame me, and it does." "Dad," Victoria started. "Let me finish. I've watched you these past few weeks, and you've been happier, more alive than I've seen you in years. And I realized something. I've been so focused on protecting your inheritance that I forgot to protect you." Richard's expression was resolute. "So yes, let's go nuclear. Let's end this definitively, because my daughter's happiness is worth more than any business relationship." They spent the next 3 hours planning. Richard's PR team would craft statements. His lawyers would prepare documentation. Victoria would reach out to contacts in media who'd been asking questions about her sudden social activity. And Marcus would compile everything he had on Blake into a coherent narrative. "One thing," Marcus said as they were wrapping up, "I want to make sure Zoe is protected through all of this. If Blake really tries to challenge my custody—" "He won't succeed," Richard interrupted. "I've already had my lawyers research the possibility. You're an exemplary father with no criminal record. A stable business, strong community ties. Blake has no grounds for any custody challenge. But to be safe, I'm assigning one of my family law attorneys to your case, pro bono. If Blake even attempts something, we'll bury him in motions." The relief Marcus felt was profound. "Thank you. Thank me by continuing to be a good influence on my daughter. She needs more honest people in her life." Over the next week, everything happened with choreographed precision. Victoria released a statement to local media about ending her relationship with Blake Morrison due to his controlling behavior and harassment. She didn't mention Marcus by name, but she was clear about Blake's character. The same day, Marcus filed a formal harassment complaint with the sheriff's department, attaching his detailed documentation of every incident. The deputy who took the report was Carson, who reviewed everything with grim satisfaction. "This is exactly what I was talking about," Carson said. "Clear pattern of escalating harassment. I can't promise criminal charges, but this creates a record that protects you if things escalate further." 24 hours later, Richard announced that Langford Holdings was dissolving all business partnerships with Morrison Investments, citing irreconcilable differences in business ethics and corporate values. The announcement sent ripples through Atlanta's business community. Blake's response was immediate and predictable. He showed up at the garage Thursday afternoon, but this time he wasn't alone. His father accompanied him, a silver-haired man who looked like an older, harder version of his son. Marcus was underneath a car when Danny called out, "Boss, you got visitors!" Marcus rolled out to find both Morrisons standing in his garage, their expensive suits completely out of place among the grease and tools. "Marcus Hill," the elder Morrison said. "I'm James Morrison. I think it's time we had a conversation." "About?" Marcus stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "About the damage you've done to my family's reputation and business interests." James's voice was cold, controlled. "You've manipulated Victoria Langford into making reckless decisions that have cost both our families millions. I want it to stop." "Then tell your son to stop harassing me and Victoria. We'll all move on with our lives." Blake stepped forward. "You think you've won? You think some press releases and Richard Langford's misguided loyalty changes anything?" "I think the truth matters," Marcus said calmly. "And the truth is that you're a controlling, abusive man who can't accept that Victoria doesn't want to be with you." Blake's face flushed red. "You don't know anything about our relationship, about what we built together. You didn't build anything together. You tried to control her, and she finally had enough courage to walk away." James held up a hand, stopping his son. "Mr. Hill, I'm going to be direct. I'm prepared to offer you $200,000 to leave Atlanta. Close your garage, take your daughter, start over somewhere else. Away from Victoria, away from our families, a clean break. The number was staggering. Life-changing money. Enough to relocate anywhere, start fresh, give Zoe opportunities Marcus had never imagined. It was also the most insulting thing anyone had ever offered him. No, Marcus said simply. You haven't even heard the full terms. Don't need to. I'm not for sale, and neither is my friendship with Victoria. You can't buy your way out of your son's behavior. Blake lunged forward, but his father caught his arm. Easy, Blake. Easy? This piece of... Blake caught himself, his jaw clenching. Do you have any idea what you've done? Victoria and I were supposed to merge our families, build something that would last generations, and you destroyed it because you wanted to play hero. I destroyed it? Marcus's laugh was humorless. Blake, you destroyed it the second you grabbed Victoria in that diner. Everything that's happened since is just consequences catching up to your actions. We're not done here, James said, his voice tight. If you won't accept a generous offer, then we'll make your life so difficult you'll wish you had. You already tried that. Tax audit, false hit-and-run report, threats about my daughter. All it proved is that you're desperate, and I'm not backing down. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the voice recorder app. But please, continue threatening me. I'm documenting everything now, and Deputy Carson at the Sheriff's Department is very interested in your family's harassment campaign. James Morrison's expression went cold. You're making a powerful enemy, Mr. Hill. No, sir. Your son made an enemy when he decided to punish me for helping someone. I'm just defending myself. After they left, Danny let out a low whistle. Boss, did you really just turn down $200,000? Yep. You're either the bravest man I know or the craziest. Probably both. Marcus's hands were shaking now that the confrontation was over. But I meant what I said. Some things aren't for sale. That evening, Marcus sat Zoe down for a serious conversation. She'd been hearing things at school, other kids asking about her dad and some rich lady about her dad being in the news. She deserved the truth, or at least an age-appropriate version. Baby, you know how I helped that woman at the diner a few weeks ago? The pretty lady who gave you money for the garage? Her name is Victoria, and yeah, well, the man who was hurting her is angry that we became friends. He's been trying to make trouble for us. Zoe's face scrunched up in that way that meant she was processing something complicated. Is he a bad man? I think he's a man who makes bad choices, and he's used to getting what he wants, so when people tell him no, he gets mean. Are we in danger? The direct question deserved an honest answer. I don't think so, but I want you to be careful. If anyone you don't know tries to talk to you at school or anywhere else, you tell a teacher immediately. And if you see anything that feels wrong, you call me right away, okay? Okay. Zoe was quiet for a moment. Daddy, did you do the right thing, helping Victoria? Yes, I believe I did. Then we'll be okay. Because good people who do right things always end up okay. That's what you taught me. Marcus pulled his daughter into a hug, hoping desperately that the worldview he'd given her was true, that the universe really did reward integrity and punish cruelty. But he also knew that sometimes good people got crushed by systems designed to protect power and privilege. Friday morning brought the breakthrough Marcus hadn't expected. Deputy Carson called with news that the district attorney was reviewing Blake's harassment campaign for possible criminal charges. Turns out you weren't his first victim, Carson explained. We found 2 other women who filed complaints about Blake Morrison's behavior. One from college, one from 2 years ago. Both were dropped after the Morrison family applied pressure. But combined with your documentation and Victoria's statement, we've got a pattern that's hard to ignore. What does that mean? Means Blake might actually face consequences for once in his privileged life. No guarantees, but the DA is taking this seriously. The news felt like vindication, but Marcus knew better than to celebrate yet. Blake was cornered now, and cornered animals were dangerous. Sure enough, Blake's final escalation came that Sunday. Marcus was in his backyard with Zoe, laying out lumber for the treehouse he'd finally started building, when his phone exploded with notifications. Someone had posted his home address online along with accusations that he was a scam artist who'd manipulated a vulnerable woman for financial gain. The post included photos of his house, his truck, even pictures of Zoe playing in the yard. Marcus's blood went cold. Publishing a child's photos was crossing a line that turned this from personal vendetta into something dangerous. He called Victoria immediately. I saw it, she said, her voice tight with fury. Blake posted it from a burner account, but we can prove it was him. Marcus, I'm so sorry. Get Zoe inside, Marcus interrupted, already moving toward his daughter. We're going to your house, now. What? Marcus? Someone posted photos of my daughter online with my address. Until we know who's seen this and what they might do with the information, Zoe and I are not staying here. He threw some clothes in a bag, grabbed Zoe, who was confused but compliant, and drove to Victoria's apartment in Atlanta. She lived in a secure building with actual doormen and security cameras, the kind of place that felt safe in a way Marcus's rural house never could when threats were flying. Victoria met them in the lobby, her face pale. I've already called my father and the police. Posting photos of a minor like this is illegal. We can press charges. Good, because this ends now, tonight. They went up to Victoria's apartment, a space that was elegant but somehow still felt lived in, with books scattered on tables and coffee mugs on the counter. Zoe was wide-eyed, taking in the marble floors and high ceilings. "Daddy, this place is fancy," she whispered. "It is, baby." "Victoria, you mind if Zoe watches TV while we talk?" "Of course not. Remote's on the coffee table." "You can watch whatever you want, sweetheart." Once Zoe was engrossed in a cartoon, Marcus turned to Victoria. "We need to end this definitively. No more half measures. What's the nuclear option?" "I file for a restraining order against Blake. My father and I both testify about his harassment campaign. We make it so public and so documented that Blake can't show his face in Atlanta without everyone knowing what he did." "Do it." Richard arrived 30 minutes later with 2 lawyers and a private investigator who'd been compiling evidence on Blake. They sat around Victoria's dining table while Zoe watched TV in the other room, oblivious to the war being planned in her honor. "The good news," one of the lawyers said, "is that posting those photos gives us grounds for emergency protective orders. We can file first thing Monday morning." "The bad news?" Marcus asked. "The bad news is that Blake is unraveling. Desperate people do unpredictable things. Until he's served with the protective order, we should assume he might escalate further." They decided Marcus and Zoe would stay at Victoria's apartment through Monday, when the legal machinery would start grinding. Richard arranged for security to be posted outside the building. The private investigator confirmed they had enough evidence to not only support a restraining order but potentially criminal harassment charges. Late that night, after Zoe was asleep in Victoria's guest room, Marcus stood on her balcony looking out at the Atlanta skyline. Victoria joined him, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "Thank you for this," Marcus said. "For everything." "I should be thanking you. You've lost so much because of me: peace, privacy, safety, and you never once blamed me for it. Because it's not your fault. Blake made his choices. I made mine. Those are separate things." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Why did you really stand up that night in the diner? The truth, not the noble answer about doing what's right." Marcus considered the question. "Honestly? Because Zoe was watching. Because I needed her to see that when someone's being hurt, you help them. That you don't calculate the cost before you do the right thing. That courage matters more than safety." He glanced at Victoria. "And because I saw something in your eyes that I recognized, that trapped desperation of knowing you deserve better but not seeing a way out. I couldn't walk away from that." "I'm glad you didn't." Victoria's voice was soft. "These past weeks, despite everything, have been the freest I've felt in years. Having a friend who expects nothing from me except honesty, who sees me as Victoria instead of Victoria Langford, heiress, you can't imagine what that means." "I think I can. People see Marcus the mechanic and make assumptions about my intelligence, my worth, my potential. You saw past that from the beginning." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights. Marcus thought about the journey from that diner confrontation to this moment. The money, the threats, the audit, the escalation. All of it because he'd made one decision to stand up when everyone else stayed seated. "No regrets?" Victoria asked, as if reading his mind. Marcus thought about it honestly. The stress, the threats, the danger to Zoe, the complications that had consumed his life for weeks. Against that, he weighed the friendship he'd found, the principles he'd maintained, the example he'd set for his daughter. No regrets, he said firmly. You? Not a single one. Monday morning arrived with surprising calm. The lawyers filed for the protective order with documentation so thorough that the judge granted an emergency temporary order within hours. Blake was served at his office by a deputy who reported that he'd gone pale and shaken when he read the filing. By Tuesday, 3 major Atlanta media outlets had picked up the story. Not because Richard pushed it, but because Victoria gave an interview to a reporter she trusted, telling her story with simple honesty. The article that resulted painted Blake as exactly what he was: a privileged man who couldn't accept rejection and had weaponized his resources to punish someone for helping. The response was overwhelming. Other women came forward with their own Blake Morrison stories. His father's company started losing clients who didn't want to be associated with the controversy. The social circle that had once protected Blake now distanced itself with practiced efficiency. By Friday, Blake's lawyer contacted Richard with a proposal. Blake would agree to a permanent restraining order, would cease all contact with Victoria and Marcus, and would issue a public apology. In exchange, they wouldn't pursue criminal charges. "What do you think?" Richard asked Marcus over the phone. "I think criminal charges would be satisfying but complicated, and I think Blake losing his reputation and influence is probably worse punishment for him than jail time anyway." Marcus paused. "But I want the apology to be real, not some lawyer-written statement. I want Blake to actually acknowledge what he did wrong." The apology came in a video Blake recorded himself, looking hollow and defeated. He admitted to harassment, to filing false reports, to using his influence inappropriately. He apologized to Victoria, to Marcus, and to anyone else he'd hurt through his actions. It wasn't eloquent, and it didn't undo the damage, but it was genuine in its brokenness. "I was taught that some people matter and some people don't," Blake said toward the end. "That wealth and connections put you above consequences. I was wrong, and I'm sorry for the pain my arrogance caused." The video went viral. Blake became a cautionary tale about privilege and accountability. His father's business lost several major contracts, and Blake himself quietly left Atlanta for somewhere far away, his tail between his legs. 2 months later, on a Saturday morning in November, Marcus stood in his backyard watching Zoe climb the ladder of the treehouse he'd finally finished building. It was everything she'd asked for: a platform, a slide, windows cut in the plywood walls, even a small roof to keep the rain out. "Daddy, it's perfect," Zoe called down. "Can Jenny come see it?" "Absolutely, I'll call her mom." Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. She'd been traveling for her foundation, visiting small businesses and community programs across the Southeast. Her trust fund had finally transferred to her full control on her 30th birthday last month, and she was using it to build something meaningful. The text read, "Landed in Millbrook, coffee in 20 minutes. I have a proposal I want to run by you." Marcus smiled and typed back, "See you there." At the coffee shop, Victoria looked radiant, tanned from travel, her eyes bright with excitement. She ordered her usual coffee and dove straight into her pitch. "I've been thinking about what you said about apprenticeships and community programs. What if we expanded that? Created a network of garages across Georgia that train young people in automotive skills while providing affordable repairs to low-income families?" Marcus leaned back, intrigued. "That's ambitious." "It is. But I've got the funding now, and I've seen what you built in Millbrook. The community trust, the honest work, the way you treat people with dignity regardless of whether they can afford full price. That's replicable. That's what communities everywhere need. You want me to help you build this network? I want you to run it, be the director, train the trainers, share what you know with people who need it. You'd still keep your garage, but you'd also help create opportunities for others." Victoria's enthusiasm was infectious. "Think about it. Instead of one Marcus Hill serving one community, we could have dozens of mechanics trained in your approach, serving communities across the state." Marcus thought about it. About young people like Danny, who needed skills and opportunity. About communities full of people like Mrs. Rodriguez, who deserved honest service. About the ripple effect of one man's integrity multiplying across a whole region. "I'd need help," he said slowly. "Can't run a network in a garage alone. I've already got a team in mind. Operations manager, training coordinator, community outreach. You focus on the automotive expertise and the culture building. Let others handle the logistics." And funding? Fully covered for the first 5 years. After that, the network should be sustainable through a combination of grant funding, sliding scale fees, and partnerships with local governments. Marcus studied Victoria's face. Seeing the woman who'd emerged from that terrified victim in the diner, she'd found her purpose, her path, and she was offering him a chance to expand his impact beyond anything he'd imagined. One condition, Marcus said, name it. We named the program after Zoe, something that reminds us we're not building this for profit or prestige, but for the next generation, for kids who deserve a fair shot. Victoria's smile was brilliant. The Zoe Hill Automotive Initiative. I love it. They shook hands across the table, two friends who'd met in crisis and built something genuine from the wreckage. The complications that had brought them together had burned away everything superficial, leaving behind a friendship and partnership based on shared values and mutual respect. That evening, Marcus told Zoe about the new program while they sat on the treehouse platform watching the sun set. They're naming it after me? Zoe's eyes were huge. They are, because you're the reason I do any of this, the reason I stand up when it's hard, the reason I believe in building something better. That's a lot of pressure, Daddy, Marcus laughed. You don't have to do anything except keep being exactly who you are. Smart, kind, brave. The program just carries your name as a reminder of what matters. I can do that. Zoe leaned against him. Daddy, I'm glad you helped Victoria that night. Even though it was scary and complicated, good things came from it. Yeah, baby, they did. Marcus looked out at the backyard, at the house he'd made into a home, at the garage that was thriving beyond his expectations. He thought about the journey from barely surviving to building something that mattered. About the moment in a diner when he'd made a choice that changed everything. People asked him sometimes if he'd do it again, knowing what it would cost, the stress, the threats, the danger. Marcus's answer was always the same, in a heartbeat, because some things were worth fighting for. Dignity, integrity, the belief that one person standing up could make a difference, and the profound truth that doing the right thing, really doing it, despite the cost, could ripple out in ways you never imagined. 3 years later, the Zoe Hill Automotive Initiative operated 17 garages across Georgia, had trained over 200 young mechanics, and had provided affordable repairs to thousands of families. Marcus split his time between his original Millbrook garage and traveling to mentor new program locations. Victoria's foundation had grown exponentially, funding everything from automotive training to small business development to community health programs. She'd become known as one of Atlanta's most effective philanthropists, someone who invested in people instead of just throwing money at problems. And Blake Morrison? He'd moved to California, started over in his family's satellite office, and from all reports had actually learned something from his spectacular fall. He was in therapy, working on himself, trying to become someone better than the man who'd terrorized a woman in a diner. On the 4th anniversary of that fateful night, Marcus and Victoria met at Rosie's diner for old time's sake. Rosie herself brought their coffees, her weathered face creasing into a smile. You two, she said, shaking her head, never thought I'd see the day when a broken water glass would lead to all this. Sometimes the smallest moments have the biggest consequences, Victoria said. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage change everything, Marcus added. After Rosie left, they sat in comfortable silence. Marcus thought about how far they'd both come, from strangers thrown together by violence to partners building something meaningful, about how that single moment of choosing to stand up had led to friendship, purpose, and impact beyond anything he'd imagined. Thank you, Victoria said suddenly. For what? For seeing me that night, for standing up when no one else would, for refusing to let Blake intimidate you, for being exactly the friend I needed even when I didn't know I needed one. Thank you for trusting me, for taking a chance on investing in my garage, for believing that ordinary people doing honest work deserve support and dignity. Victoria raised her coffee mug. To courage, in small moments. Marcus clinked his mug against hers. To friendships that change everything. Outside, the Georgia sun set over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Inside the diner, two friends sat together, bound by shared experience and mutual respect, living proof that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply stand up when everyone else stays seated. That one choice, that single moment of courage, had rippled out into jobs created and lives changed and communities served. It had transformed a struggling mechanic into a leader and a trapped heiress into a force for genuine good. And it had all started with a broken water glass, a frightened woman, and a man who simply couldn't sit by and watch someone be hurt. Marcus drove home that evening to find Zoe, now 12, brilliant and bold, working on a school project at the kitchen table. She looked up as he entered, her face lighting up. "Hey, Daddy, how was your day?" "Good, baby, real good." "You see Victoria?" "I did. She says hi." Zoe returned to her homework, and Marcus stood in the doorway watching his daughter, feeling the weight and privilege of being someone's entire world. All the struggles, all the sacrifices, all the moments of choosing hard right over easy wrong had led to this. A daughter who knew her worth, a business that served with integrity, and a friendship that proved people from different worlds could build something real. The treehouse in the backyard was weathered now, silvered by 3 years of Georgia sun and rain. But it still stood strong, just like everything else Marcus had built. Because when you build on foundations of honesty and courage, and doing what's right even when it costs you, what you create lasts. Marcus had learned that lesson in a diner on a Tuesday night, and he'd spent every day since proving it true. Some stories end with dramatic conclusions. Villains defeated, heroes triumphant, every conflict resolved with cinematic finality. But the best stories, the real stories, end with something quieter and more profound. They end with ordinary people choosing extraordinary courage, building meaningful lives from simple acts of integrity, and discovering that the ripples from one good choice can spread further than any villain's schemes. This was Marcus Hill's story. A single father, a struggling mechanic, a man who stood up when it mattered and refused to back down even when the cost was high. And through that simple act of courage, he'd changed not just his own life, but the lives of everyone he touched. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything.